Just a couple of words, because I would like to leave floor to the many speakers of this extremely rich program. I'm actually glad and proud to welcome you to the Department of the Arts of the University of Bologna in this sunny and warm spring Italian landscape. And I'm glad and proud for two reasons. On one hand, I'm absolutely passionate about medical dramas from the beginnings. I mean, of course, ER, but since I'm pretty old, I am also referring to the British series Doctor in the House, or MASH, the TV series, and its spin-off Trapper John, where the young Dr. Gregory Harrison, also known as Gonzo Gates, has been reminded to me in many of the topics and atmospheres of the recent Italian successful series Doc, exported in so many countries, including Japan and so on. And let me mention House MD, who is one of my personal heroes, and the kind of doctor I hope to meet in any hospital, exclusively focused on the challenge to solve any mysterious disease, despite his absolute disregard for the patient. But I won't continue because the list could be very, very long, and I only would like to underline how crucial is the study of medical dramas in many different multidisciplinary perspectives. For example, in order to boost the reciprocal, the mutual confidence between doctors and patients. By the way, on the other hand, I'm glad to be here because it's the 14th annual conference of an extraordinary research association, Media Mutations, which was born inside our department on initiative of my dear friend and colleague, Guglielmo Pescatore, together with Roberta Pearson and other prestigious international scholars. And Media Mutations became one of the fundamental research networks in the field of television studies. That's why I'm going to conclude with my deepest thanks to Guglielmo and, of course, to the curators of the conference, Stefania Antonioni and Marta Rocchi, to the speakers of these 2 days, and all of you. Thank you very much and enjoy the conference.
Salve, buongiorno. I welcome you from the Media Mutation Association to its 14th annual conference. The conference that begins today is in fact conceived by the association and organized in collaboration with the Department of the Arts. And I would like to thank Director Giacomo Manzoli, who joined us. Over the year, the association, which focuses on research in the field of audiovisual media, has set itself the goal of proposing, through the conference, innovative research teams that are not widely diffused in the Italian scientific community and, at times, also in the international one. Among others, I would like to recall the conferences dedicated to narrative ecosystems, production models and serial forms, ephemeral media, formats, cognitive approaches, entertainment and soft power through the media, broadcasting, data-driven perspective for media studies. This year's theme, investigating medical drama TV series, approaches and perspectives, focuses on the exploration of medical drama within a 3-year research project founded by the Italian Ministry of University. The project's objectives closely align with those of the conference, promising an engaging and enlightening event. Our main goal is to investigate the ecosystemic approach applied to medical drama, a globally popular and long-standing television genre. With significant interest from the academic community, as well as the broader context of the pandemic, narratives about healthcare institutions and physicians have gained substantial relevance. In the realm of constructing narratives about institutions, medical drama becomes particularly fascinating for our research. It offers an opportunity to understand how these narratives reflect and shape our understanding of healthcare institutions, especially in times when they play pivotal roles and become subjects of public discourse. The COVID-19 outbreak has presented a significant case of societal disruption, prompting the medical narrative to reflect on its own representations. From an ecosystemic perspective, we will explore the productive and narrative responses to this disruption and examine the reflexivity triggered in the public, with a special focus on the relationship with the health institution. Our project aims to make a substantial scientific contribution to the study of contemporary television seriality by implementing the ecosystem approach. The outcomes of our research will have practical implications, including evaluating productive and industrial strategies. Moreover, we will investigate the role of television seriality and narrative products in disseminating discourse, judgments, and values concerning sensitive issues. This exploration will provide valuable insights into the broader impact of narratives on shaping public opinion. We express our gratitude to the conference organizer, Stefania Antonioni and Marta Rocchi, for their efforts in making this event possible. We look forward to fruitful discussions and the exchange of knowledge as we delve in the captivating world of medical drama and its wider implications. I wish everyone a great conference.
Welcome everyone to Media Mutation 14. Before we dive into the conference, we would like to give a quick introduction. But first of all, let us direct our thought and support to all the people who are experiencing moments of great difficulty due to the weather condition of these days. Until yesterday, we believed that this will have been the first edition of Media Mutation International Conference back to being fully in person after the pandemic. However, due to the weather condition, we have anticipated the possibility of online connection. Nonetheless, we are thrilled to welcome all of you in person and online. As you may already know, and as you can see in our new Media Mutation website, the past 13 editions of this conference have focused on innovative topics that are central to the entire international film and media studies community. The topic of this year's conference is particularly important to us. And my colleague, Stefania Antonioni, and I are currently involved in a 3-year national project funded by the Italian Ministry of University and Research entitled Narrative Ecosystem Analysis and Development Framework, a systemic approach to the contemporary serial product, the case of medical drama. This conference is organized in collaboration with the research group and the 3 universities involved: University of Bologna, University of Urbino Carlo and the Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore. We will have the opportunity to hear some contribution on our ongoing work in different panels. And we want to establish a dialogue with other research conducted during this period on medical drama and all it faced. In fact, we would like to keep this dialogue open with all researchers interested in this topic, even after the conference is over. As you all know, we will be discussing approaches and perspectives of study on medical drama TV series. In recent years, television series have gained both economic and cultural relevance, proving to be products adaptable in diverse contexts. And the project we are involved in aims to consider serial audiovisual product as narrative ecosystem, which are complex structures that organize textual elements, production models, and various consumption practices. Our project focuses specifically on medical drama series, and we have 2 main objectives. The first one is to build and validate a multi-methodological and transdisciplinary framework necessary for the development of dynamic models of television seriality. And the second one is to investigate the relationship between serial narrative production and social discursiveness, exploring the hypothesis that fiction are active participants in discursive production.
At Media Mutations 14 conference, we aim to have discussions on various approaches and perspectives for the study of medical drama. Thanks to your contribution, we will delve into current practices and ongoing debates regarding this topic. If you have had a chance to take a look at the program, you will see that between this afternoon and tomorrow, there will be 7 panels and a keynote speech tomorrow morning at 9:30, given by our colleague Irene Cambrabadi from the University of Vic. She's one of the most experienced researchers on medical drama, which she has worked on from the point of view of the specificity of the genre, from the point of view of its reception, and its use as a teaching tool for students in medical fields. So don't miss this speech. The various panels will be dedicated to research findings and reflection on medical drama using various research approaches and theoretical perspectives, from content analysis and formulaic aspects on the genre applied to specific case studies, to quantitative analysis on linguistic aspects, network analysis, and from the impact of COVID-19 on the genre as a whole, to the production and screenwriting aspects, to gender and diversity issues, and to the point of view of physicians and medical professionals on medical drama. So, and we will travel across time through the most recent productions and most popular evergreen titles, and in space, thanks to research on American, Italian, Chinese, and Japanese TV series. So there is really something for all interests and research curiosities. We hope that, like us, you also feel the need to push the boundaries of individual research and expand the horizons of study by exploring new collaboration, even among us. We are grateful to all the authors of the papers that we'll be hearing today and tomorrow, especially because many of them have been forced to reschedule their speech, giving it online, or to reschedule their trip to Bologna. And we are also grateful to our all colleagues that accepted to chair the panels. We are delighted to confirm that we will be publishing the conference proceedings, and we hope that they will feature all your contributions. Media Mutations 14 is organized in collaboration with the Department of Arts, DAMS Lab, and with the 3-year PRIN project NEAD framework. We would also like to extend our gratitude to the University of Bologna, the Department of Arts, DAMS Lab, Arti Culture, and all of our colleagues, administrators, and technicians who have made this conference possible. And of course, we would like to express our special thanks to all of you who are attending this event in person, only the brave, and online. So after this introduction, we can start the conference with the first panel. And now we will hand over to the floor to the session chair, Dr. Dario Manfellotto, and the first panelists. Thank you.
Good evening to you all. My name is Dario Manfellotto. I am a physician. I work as an internist in Fate Bene Fratelli Hospital in Rome, one of the most ancient hospitals in the world. I am the president of Italian Society of Hospital in Internal Medicine. First of all, let me thank very much the organizers of this very interesting meeting with this very at least for me, different approach from what I usually do. And I usually deal with medicine, TV, and medical drama. Let me thank Professor Giacomo Manzoli, Professor Pescatore, Professor Antonioni, and Rocchi for organization and invitation. Thank you very much. I would like to reassure you, Giacomo, I'm with my sick, I'm not studying as Dr. House, but anyway, a lumbar pain, which is terrible. So it's a period of treatment. Anyway, so I just few words to introduce the session I'm chairing this afternoon. Which will be composed of two presentations by Dr. Chang and Dr. Hu, who's supposed to be connected because they have not been able to come to Bologna. Are you connected?
Yes,
okay.
we are.
Wait for them. And then there's Dr. Rosa Barozzi. She's here for the second presentation. Together with Clio Nicastro and Roberta Martina. I think that this approach of medical drama to medical problems, to the real life of all of us who work in the hospital, has very much impacted also our life and in some way, our way of doing and working as doctors. And also to deal with patients, because sometimes we deal with patients, we speak with patients, we speak with their relatives, and when we remind sometimes what happens in the drama and what happens in TV. So in some ways helping us also to correct some of our mistakes. And also it's impacting our discussion in the morning. We come maybe the day after one of medical dramas very popular has been in Italy, Doc. And so we were discussing the case that's been discussed the night before, and also something that happened there. So it's really something new also for us as doctors and as professionals in this field. Now, if we have the confirmation of the connection of Dr. Chang, I don't know, but anyway, I would like to, yes. So, okay, thank you very much for this, but I would like to invite before Dr. Barozzi. Oh, you are already here. I didn't see you right. And then we connect with Dr. Chan. This was the schedule you gave me, Stefania. Okay, Rosa Barozzi is speaking on behalf also Clio Nicastro and Roberta Martini, screening, gender medicine, representations of health, and the gendered body in recent US-based dramedies and medical dramas. You know, you have 20 minutes. È pronto con le diapositive lei? Sì. Okay, perfetto. You have 20 minutes. Let's try to be precise in time. So we have time for discussion. Please, Rosa.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to the organizers. Also on behalf of Clio Nicastro and Roberta Martina Zagarella, who couldn't be here today. It's a wonderful opportunity to have an actual medical doctor hearing us
here in our work today, with the caveat that we come from very different types of disciplines, and so we look forward to your generous critiques. So this is some preliminary notes on a project that we are developing with Doctors Nicastro and Zagarella. I'll get right into it, just in terms of sticking with the 20-minute time frame. So in recent years, awareness of sex and gender inequalities in healthcare has been gaining momentum following a number of paradigm-shifting developments in the biomedical and cultural fields. Some of the most significant developments in this sense have been the institutionalization of gender medicine in the 21st century, which places attention upon the impact of sex and gender on human pathophysiology, and mobilizations by women and queer people around the world against the abuse of power by men, most famously in the film industry, and the effects of those abuses on mental and physical health. Gender medicine and the various manifestations of the Me Too movement, both partly influenced by the long tail of the feminist women's health movement of the 1960s, have already led to a number of positive steps towards the elimination of healthcare inequalities based on sex and gender. After much lobbying and research, for example, it is now common knowledge that part of the reason why women die of coronary heart disease at a much higher rate than men is because we had so far failed to account for the different symptomatology of this pathology between the sexes. Since its recent birth at the turn of the century, gender medicine has brought much needed attention to the importance of sex and gender for health and medical knowledge more generally. Gender medicine, which focuses on, quote, the impact of gender on human physiology, pathophysiology, and clinical features of diseases, unquote, has led to invaluable insights regarding previously unknown differences in the way people exhibit symptoms, are diagnosed, and respond to therapies. Although a positive step by any account, gender medicine has not been immune to complexity. For instance, gender medicine has at times reinforced the gender and dimorphic biases that it was in principle created to address. This, for example, is how pediatrician George M. Lazarus describes the scene that sparked his interest in gender medicine in his contribution to one of the first textbooks in the field, Principles of Gender-Specific Medicine from 2010. And I quote, "At an outdoor concert I attended, the girls danced ballet style to the music. The boys chased and tackled each other like little football players. No one told the children how to play. They just did what came naturally, and there was no crossover behavior between the boys and the girls," unquote. This kind of medical attention to difference is not very different to the one that we are used to seeing employed to reinforce hierarchies of race and gender. Historically, this has been the case with adjunct science produced in the 18th and 19th centuries in Europe and the US to justify the institution of slavery on the basis of the biological inferiority of non-white races, or to deny women suffrage during moments when progressive political possibilities were threatening patriarchal authority. The idea of fundamental sexual differences as fixed in the body has therefore been employed many times in the recent past and present to naturalize social inequalities. Finally, as trans and non-binary activists point out, a sex-segregated health system risks turning gender medicine into a, quote, two-gender medicine, which adds barriers to non-dimorphic people's access to healthcare. As these examples suggest, an approach to healthcare that takes difference into consideration must be particularly careful to bring to light issues such as inherent bias, access, communication, language, and cultural competence. The risks of a pure logic of difference that does not take into account sociopolitical factors, but presumes to be based on purely biological ones, under the false assumption that biological factors are in some way completely separate to the sociopolitical context, are immense. We know, for example, from research that women with cardiovascular problems may tend to underreport basic symptoms, such as chest pain, for cultural reasons, that women have a much higher rate of orbital fractures, which might be explained as a result of domestic violence, and that lesbian women have a higher rate of breast cancer, which might be explained by their higher reluctance to visit doctors for regular checks out of fear of being mistreated by medical staff. The numerous social factors that result in health differences between men and women are often overlooked in gender medicine research. In some reports, for instance, it's proposed that although gender medicine publications cite observational studies according to which women suffer from more cardiac sequelae after acute coronary syndrome, a recent study demonstrates that gender roles, such as being the primary provider, questions of employment and household responsibilities, rather than sex, are more closely associated with prognosis after ACS. According to the same research, gender-associated behaviors are shown to influence seemingly sex-related differences in osteoporosis and melanoma, and there is research to suggest that sex-related differences documented in laboratory animals can stem from behavior and living conditions rather than from biological differences. In the view of such researchers, therefore, sex differences are often caused by other variables that correlate with the sex category. They conclude that searching for these, often social-cultural variables and their significance to health, instead of using only sex as a proxy for these values, would benefit personalized medicine. The institution of gender medicine is a step forward on our way to healthcare equality. But as the examples above demonstrate, it can only function as such if it does not take its role as self-evident and its assumptions as objectively inviolable. In other words, the mere fact that such a thing as gender medicine exists does not hinder social cultural bias against women, non-binary and non-cis people from continuing to influence its conclusions. The concept of difference itself is a particularly potent example of this. As a strictly biomedical category, it involves great risks from a social justice point of view. Conversely, as a biopolitical project, it can lead to complex and nuanced discussions regarding issues such as self-determination, minority rights, and state policy. How, therefore, we think about and visualize difference is, in that sense, of immense importance in the era of gender medicine. As Kara Keeling points out, our bodies often exceed the schemas available to represent them. The ways in which visual representation organize social reality can be rigid and prescriptive, for example, in the way in which they describe female and male bodies as opposite to and complementary with each other. But they can also be disturbed and changed by those who do not see themselves reflected in them. It is therefore crucial to understand how that relationship functions and evolves, as new discoveries by the biomedical community, interest groups that fight misrepresentation, or institutions that wish to promote equal access to healthcare seek to impact our collective visualizations of health and illness. We agree with those who suggest that gender medicine is compromised by the incomplete project of an interdisciplinary dialogue between the biomedical field and areas of thought that include feminist science studies, gender and queer studies, media and cultural studies, and philosophy. The absence of meaningful communication between these fields disallows gender medicine from acquiring an expanded view of itself as part of larger social structures. It has long been recognized, for instance, that cultural representations of medical practices and institutions and their reception is a fundamental part of understanding the relationship of medicine and healthcare to the societies they are embedded in and which they help shape. But there has been very little research into how visual culture has reflected, promoted, or understood the recent gender medicine developments. Within that visual culture, and especially popular visual culture, medical dramas appear to offer themselves as particularly fruitful vehicles for gender medicine communication, if nothing else because they often feature medical doctors on their screenwriting teams, and given that their influence on the... Sì, adesso vado. No, ancora schiacciato. No. And given that the influence of medical dramas on the public's perception of medical assistance has been confirmed by researchers such as Marta, Rocchi, and her literature review of medical dramas. So our hypothesis today is that the basic format of the medical drama does not always necessarily align well with the type of communication required for visualizing the insights of a gender medicine that addresses the complex associations between sex, gender, and health. As research has pointed out, medical drama patient narrative arcs generally have to conclude within the confines of a single episode and have to additionally compete for screen time with at least another patient case to accommodate the larger narrative arcs of the medical ensemble cast and their relationships. This, according to some researchers, is the paradox at the heart of the medical drama, that, quote, the very qualities that contribute to uniquely compelling enactments of medical scenarios also threaten to undermine their objective accuracy, unquote. There is therefore usually not enough time for complexity and nuance in the presentation of many medical cases. By definition, patient characters are not given enough screen time to develop into three-dimensional figures the way the medical doctors on the ensemble cast do. Additionally, the disease narrative arc remains largely within the confines of some variation of the following schema: symptom diagnosis number 1, crisis diagnosis number 2, resolution, which manifests as either cure or death. Therefore, it is not a coincidence that we find more nuance and complexity in depictions of pathologies when the patient is one of the doctors who form part of the protagonist ensemble casts of medical dramas, as we will see in some of our examples. In this presentation, we also try to suggest that it is not surprising that other formats and genres, such as dramedies or the sex education subgenre that has recently been flourishing in streaming websites, often do a better job of presenting medical cases where the recent lessons of gender medicine are more adequately addressed. This, as we suggest, comes down at least partly to the fact that in the latter genres, we are not meant to identify with the medical gaze, but with that of the patient co-protagonist, who is therefore programmatically and already a fully realized three-dimensional character when they encounter patienthood. So we're going to look at two macro examples for medical dramas. One is a heart attack and the other is eating disorders. So I'm going to, but without the sound, so just the. So as we, this one. No, not this one, sorry. Great, yeah, this one. So as we mentioned in the introduction, we now know that women may experience symptoms that are typically less associated with a heart attack. Episode 11, season 14 of Grey's Anatomy explicitly addresses this topic by presenting the experience of one of the main characters of the series, Miranda Bailey, who's Grace Sloan's Memorial Hospital's chief of surgery. The episode opens with her realizing she's having a heart attack. Her symptoms include indigestion, nausea, and stomachache. And reluctant to let her husband and other colleagues know, she goes to another hospital's emergency room for help. But when her EKG comes back normal, the doctor insists that her heart is fine and begins a different line of questioning. He starts by asking things like, are there any big stressors in your life? To which she replies, quote, do not go down that road with me, the road where a woman shows up in an ER with physical symptoms and you decide that it must be that she's not able to handle all her feelings, unquote. I'm just going to have it play in the background without the sound. Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to leave it to play in the background because there's no time to watch the dialogue. I'm going to speak over it as you watch it. So the scene is staged as an argument between doctors, right? The patient, who's also a doctor, Chief Bailey, and then chief of surgery of the Seattle Press Hospital, who is a middle-aged white man who's also a Yale graduate, all aspects of his identity that are thematized in the dialogue. For example, as she tries to convince him to give her treatment for a heart attack, Bailey says to him, quote, apparently your teachers didn't get the memo that women's health attacks don't manifest the way they do in men. They're not all chest clutching, vomiting, help, my arm is numb, boom, floor drop, unquote. Chief Bailey insists that she's having a heart attack, and as she replies to Dr. Maxwell's questions about lifestyle and medication, she says that she takes antidepressants to manage obsessive compulsive disorder, at which point she sees the reaction of Dr. Maxwell and responds, quote, yes, I have obsessive compulsive disorder. I am not ashamed of that, but it's not my story. And if you continue to look at just that one piece, if you check the mental illness box and refuse to look at anything else, then I'm not going to live long enough. At which point she asks for a second medical opinion, which prompts Dr. Maxwell to bring on a psychiatrist. Chief Bailey, increasingly angry, repeats again to the psychiatrist, quote, 63% of women who die suddenly from coronary heart disease had no previous symptoms, and women of color are at a far greater risk. So if I were consulting on the patient you describe, I would take into consideration statistics that would never even occur to people who look like you, unquote. Therefore, she brings in the intersectional aspect of not only the fact that women suffer different types of symptoms than men, and that this is a fact that is often sort of under communicated even to medical staff, and the fact that Black women suffer at much higher rates than white women because of additional sort of questions of discrimination and inequality. In the end of the episode, Chief Bailey is forced to ask for help of one of her own colleagues, Dr. Maggie Pierce, who's a Black young surgeon who works in her hospital, and together they defend the importance of new protocols and non-conventional approaches to women's health. So, the Grey's Anatomy episode was aired in February 2018. Exactly a year later, in February 2019, the Dramedy musical series, so not a medical drama, called Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, aired an episode in which Paula Proctor, a central character in the story and the main protagonist's sidekick and confidant, is eventually pressured by family members and colleagues to see a doctor. In her early 50s, Paula sees her symptoms of excessive sweating, fatigue, and nausea as obviously linked to menopause. At the doctor's office, she tells him as much. She tells him to give her obvious diagnosis of menopause and urges him so that she can get on with her busy life and impending deadlines. Having asked targeted questions about the type of vomit and other questions relating to her vitals, the doctor replies confidently that Paula is having a heart attack and should be immediately taken to the OR. This is a narratively significant moment in the development of the plot of the series and the two main characters' relationship. It was viewed by critics as yet another instance in which the show, which is not a medical drama, engaged in an explicit, perhaps even pedantic attempt at women's health advocacy. And the episode shows that in the year between the Grey's Anatomy episode and this one, the representation of the attitude of medical professionals towards women's varying symptomatology when it comes to heart attacks shifts from a life and death debate between doctors belonging to different generations and different social groups to one in which that kind of knowledge is matter of fact from the point of view of the medical staff and something that they're well prepared for. Right. How much time do I have? Okay, I'm just going to quickly go through the second example, which is that of eating disorders. Eating disorders constitute an emblematic example of how gender medicine makes its appearance in medical dramas, because the representation of eating disorders in those dramas appear to reinforce the gendered construction of such disorders, and they appear to support argument that more nuanced representations of such disorders, both in terms of the time frame and the accuracy of the representation, almost always involve members of the doctor's ensemble cast rather than single episode narrative arcs. Time plays a key role in the cinematic representation of eating disorders, especially because they require a long multi-therapeutical approach, since they are chronic illnesses and therefore in conflict with the daily routine of food intake and subject to relapse. So just to briefly describe the episodes that we wanted to look at here, we have episodes from 4 different medical dramas: The Good Doctor, Chicago Med, New Amsterdam, and Holby City, where we found that the persistence of gender stereotypes in patient narrative arcs is especially strong in cases of women who suffer from anorexia. We have 2 episodes of anorexia that present 2 adult women, one in her 30s, a mother in her 40s, therefore underlining the fact that eating disorders are chronic conditions, not exclusively affecting teenage girls. So that's a step forward in that type of the representation. But at the same time, both patients are infantilized, and the general tenor of the episode seems to suggest that there is some kind of personal responsibility or choice involved in, quote unquote, reducing oneself to a state of poor health. Without sound, yeah. In both The Good Doctor and Chicago Med, the 2 anorexic female patients arrive at the hospital in critical conditions caused by being severely underweight after a lifelong struggle with anorexia. The woman in The Good Doctor has a heart condition and needs to be operated on, but she's too frail to be able to do so. But she can also not stand to be force-fed. And the doctor who's following her case suggests an experimental deep brain stimulation surgery. The problem, of course, with the deep brain stimulation surgery, on top of the fact that I don't think it's still possible, but the doctor will confirm this for us, is that she's confronted with a very basic kind of dilemma, which is that the surgery risks touching the center of her brain that affects her affection for her child. So she does go through with the surgery, and when she wakes up in a very reductive way, the first thing she says is, "I'm hungry." Everyone is extremely happy, but then she hugs her son and declares to the doctor that she feels differently about her affection towards her son. So the point here is that she has to make the ultimate sacrifice, especially since this character is presented to us as nothing other than her role as mother and wife throughout the episode. So we know nothing about the sort of biography of her symptoms, and we know nothing else about her life, except that she is a mother. So the fact that she needs to make that sacrifice is meant to make us ask whether that fate is kind of worse than death somehow. In the other episode, the patient actually dies and is treated in a way that is almost berating by the doctors and the medical staff. And just to close, we wanted to, this third example and the fourth example from hobby sitting include two doctors who form part of the ensemble cast, who both suffer from bulimia, and whose timelines, of course, are longer than the one episode usually afforded a patient. And that gives them time to develop, for the audience to develop an understanding of the complexities and nuances of such disorders, with its ups and downs and with its lack of an absolute resolution. And I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I would like to call to the floor to the chair, Irene Cambra Badi. Okay, you're here for chairing the next session. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Sure. Of course, come here. Hello to you all. Thank you very much for attending this panel, and thank you very, very much specifically to Marta, Rocchi, and Stefania. Tomorrow I will thank you again, because it's really, really a pleasure and a great joy for me to be here today with you. So we are going to start right on time with the panel number 2. We're going to follow this exact order. So Matteo, you're going first. May I introduce you with your short bio? Matteo Tarantino is assistant professor at the Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore de Milan. Excuse me for my Italian and my English as well. And the director of the Sino-Italian Cultural Industry Observatory, SICIO, sorry, project there. His work focused on the intersection between digital infrastructure and content, politics and culture, particularly in the Chinese context. Among his recent publications, it is Il Tecnodragone, l'immaginario tecnologico cinesi ieri, oggi e domani. And Natalia Riva is your co-author of this presentation, teaches Chinese language and culture. She holds a PhD in history, institutions, and international relations of modern and contemporary Asia and Africa in the University of Cagliari, Italy. She has lectured in Chinese language and culture and history of contemporary China at several Italian universities. From 2020 to 2022, she was a postdoc researcher at the Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore de Milan, and her studies focused on China cultural strategies, soft power, and discursive practices of contemporary China's political and media discourses. She also carries out Chinese and Italian translation work. So welcome, and you have 20 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And good afternoon to everyone. So today what we are going to do, and I use we because this is much more the work of my co-author, actually of Natalia, much more than mine. She's the one who was knee-deep into Chinese medical drama for months. So I was just the guy saying, okay, what did you see there? But I am presenting here and she cannot be here, which is really a pity. So what we are going to do is we are going to show you the first results, the first proceedings of what our unit has been doing in the frame of the project of national interest that Professor Pescatore referred to in the opening of this conference. And our unit works specifically on Chinese medical drama, contemporary Chinese medical drama. So today, what we are going to do, if this works, which it doesn't. Okay. We are going to present you an overview of the main topics that we identified and the main topics we are working on in our sample. So basically, the context of what we are doing is that medical drama is as important in China and has the same implication that the literature has found as in any other context. But China is particularly interesting in this respect for two reasons. Number one, it has a fast-growing and really booming industry of television drama, and particularly, not particularly, but also of medical drama, which has been, medical drama in particular, has been increasing, ramping up production, particularly in the 2010s. So in direct, parallel with the ascent of Xi Jinping as the new party secretary. As we will see, the reference to Xi Jinping is not secondary in what we are going to discuss about. In case you don't know, Xi's mandate as the current secretary of the Chinese Communist Party is marked by a strong departure from the previous era, the era of Hu Jintao, in the sense that Xi's mandate is connotated by a stronger closure to the external world and much more strongly overtly nationalistic rhetoric, as compared with the Hu era, which was instead very open and to the point of being maybe too open in the opinion of some, and characterized by strong decentralization. This means that the People's Republic, this is the second factor of interest to us, the People's Republic of China has always had, and it has been tightening in the past few years, explicit, highly codified regulations about content of television materials. I say tightening because it's always been there, but Chinese television has gone through a wave of marketization in the 90s and the early 2000s, in which some of the content, in particular when IPTV, so internet television, became stronger, has escaped a little bit of central control. And now also this part of the policy and administration has been re-centralized strongly. So this mandate, a pedagogic mandate of television content, is the core of the crux of our interest. What we want to see is how this mandate is reflected in Chinese medical drama. I will not belabor too much on this point, but there is a very, very extensive legal scaffolding for content of television material. And if you're interested, I can share all of this with you, but of particular interest are the TV drama content management regulations of 2010, in which it says television drama content creation and dissemination shall persist in the orientation of serving the people and serving socialism and the policy of letting 100 flowers bloom and 100 schools debate. Persist in being close to reality, being close to life, and being close to the masses. Persist in the principle of social interest first, and the integration of social interest and economic interest, guaranteeing correct artistic orientation. And then if you really like a challenge, I would like to share with you separately the 14th 5 years plan, Chinese TV drama development plan, which outlines what is going to happen in the next 5 years in Chinese production. So this is to say that this is not, how to say, unspoken or tacit knowledge. It's very much codified in law, and everyone knows very well what they are supposed to do and not to do, okay? But if we were to stop here and just assume that Chinese TV content is a direct translation of the party's will, we would be oversimplifying things. And that's what we are going to illustrate a little bit today. So what we are going to do, what we're going to say is based on the analysis, qualitative analysis of sequences, analysis of isotopes as per Rocchi and Pescatore's methodology, and analysis of institutional documents and discourse, so far over 5 different series that we are going to variously reference in this presentation that go from 2012, so right before the era of Xi Jinping, all the way to 2021. Now, the first theme that I want to cover, the first area that I want to cover is the area of national politics. This is the easy one. This is what I don't want to stop at, okay? But it's true that the regulations themselves prescribe very clearly that one of the missions of Chinese TV dramas is the promotion of fundamental principles of contemporary Chinese socialism. So what are known in Chinese as core socialist values, which are divided in 3 levels: national, social, and individual. And they variously represented also graphically. In one of the most famous representations is the 3 that you see on the right. So prosperity, democracy, civilization, harmony, freedom, equality, justice, the rule of law, patriotism, dedication, integrity, and friendliness. Okay, so far so good. And if we look into Chinese TV series, medical TV series, we see plenty of that. We see plenty of explicit references to these values and the Chinese political imaginary. So, for example, what you see here is one of the TV series, Emergency Doctors. The character on the upper right is actually American. Is a girl who was adopted in America but feels Chinese, and she's explaining to the doctor on the left that for orphans, if it's a boy, if the orphan is a boy, the surname, the family name must be Guo, which is country. And if it's a girl, then it's Dang, which is party, okay? Or also, if you look at the lower right hand, it makes a reference to Lei Feng, which is a very famous soldier of the People's Liberation Army. So this is, I mean, very basic, if you want to say, propaganda, okay? It explicitly refers to the party, to the guidelines, to the values. But there is more to that in internal policies. And one of the topics that we find most interesting, more interesting, is actually the representation of the social standing of healthcare professionals, also because it will connect to the third theme. So basically what happens is that most of the Chinese TV series that originated after 2010 basically revolve around the relationship between the doctor, the patients, and the families. And you could say, well, that's medical drama all over the world, plus sentimental subplots. But in China, just like in the US, there is a significant component of conflict in there. So what happens is that in the Confucian ethic, the notion of patient is not limited to the individual that is being treated, but also the family of the individual. And the decisions of the family are equally important as the decision of the patient itself. So what is happening is that most of these dramas reflect in a very stark way the fact that in a privatized medicine like Chinese medicine, in which the cost of treatment is on the families, there are continuous conflicts between patients, doctors, and families and doctors. And what is most interesting here is that this relationship and this conflict is not swept under the rug at all. It's actually very explicitly put front and center. So the disgruntled nature, the disgruntled feeling of the patient and of the family is very much in front and center. So the negative implications of what is essentially a privatized medical system are very explicit in these productions. However, the pedagogic mandate invests this area too. So one of the things that this TV series do is try to educate the public to the correct relationship between patient and doctor. So when violence and direct attacks against doctors became object of national attention starting around 2012. They were also reflected in the TV series that then presented doctors very much as fallible, as human beings with their own fragilities, under a lot of pressures, and so on and so forth. But this education became even explicit. So this is what happens at the end of each episode of one of these TV series, in which the characters in character walk out of the story, and in each episode present a tidbit of medical education to the people. So they present themselves not as the actor, but as the character, and then explain how to do CPR, what happens when somebody falls on the ground, what do we do with first aid to people in a coma, to prepare the audience to what is correct in a real hospital. Okay, so and this is again responding to an explicit pedagogic mandate to educate the people. Okay, so much for internal politics. The second, and to me, the most interesting element instead, are the international politics of medicine, which are represented in Chinese medical drama. As international politics of medicine, what we mean is the relationship in the medical field between the People's Republic of China and everybody else in the world. And as I say everybody else, I mostly refer to the United States and Europe, which are the two main poles in that relationship, but not only, as we will see. Now, medicine has historically, especially in the 20th century, 19th and 20th century, from the 19th and 20th century onward, being one of the elected areas of tensions between China and the rest of the world. And this is due also to the fact that China has a very strong, still present indigenous medical tradition, what is known as traditional Chinese medicine. Okay, but as you will see, things are again more nuanced and complicated than simply pitting traditional Chinese medicine against Western medicine, which is the official medicine actually of the People's Republic of China. So that's one of the areas of conflict, what we call medical approach. And the second area of conflict, as we will see, is what we refer to as medical knowledge. So the geopolitics of training of medical professionals. So for what regards the medical approach, what is interesting is that traditional Chinese medicine is very much present in medical drama production, but it's encapsulated in its own genre. So you have specific productions on traditional Chinese medicine, which present traditional TCM practitioners as heroes, variously involved in the struggle for the freedom of China against the Japanese, well, mostly against the Japanese, honestly, in this TV series, but or even further back in time, in previous centuries, heroes that codified traditional Chinese medicine. However, traditional Chinese medicine is seldom or never present in dramas, medical dramas that have to do with conventional medicine. So it's almost as if it's we should speak in China of traditional medical dramas and medical dramas. And the two seldom, actually in our sample, never connect, okay? This conflict is never represented. So that's an interesting part of this, because on the one hand, you have enshrining of traditional Chinese medicine as a significant part of Chinese cultural heritage, which is also part of the guidelines we saw before. But on the other hand, this is never pitted against official medicine. It's almost as if the two proceed in parallel. Oops. Okay, yes. The second topic is the politics of medical knowledge. I'll be fast here. So basically what is happening is that studying abroad, a character that studied medicine abroad up until the last 10 years was very much, the value of his studying abroad was very prominent in the series. Okay, so you had old doctor versus new doctor and so on and so forth. after the Xi Jinping's era, the value of these overseas doctors and their knowledge has been progressively reduced and their centrality to the point that we have explicit calls to Sinicization. So to transform what this overseas doctor learned in the United States or Europe into Chinese knowledge. This is a section from, again, Emergency Doctors, episode 6, in which there was this explicit call, and one old Chinese doctor tells to the female American trained doctor, okay, now it's time for you to synthesize your American thinking, which in this case was about preserving as much as possible of a patient's intestine against the real interest. The third and final point are fictional pandemics policies. So how COVID-19 was represented. I will be very fast on this. COVID is represented in two ways. One, it is a metaphorical presence in fictions which are not COVID related. The most prominent of which is Ebola fighters, which represents actually a real life Ebola outbreak in Central Africa, but is set in a fictional nation. And of course, here you have COVID as the paradigm of pandemics, but it's also interesting, Ebola fighters, because it drops completely doctors that studied abroad. So all the doctors that go to help the African people are Chinese, and actually it represents African doctors that studied in China and are super grateful to China for the opportunity. And the second one is With You, and I'm going to close on this. With You is interesting because it's an example of what are known as COVID dramas. So this is a specific subgenre that tells the story of what happened with COVID-19 in China from the Chinese perspective. And as you may imagine, here the representation is, of course, informed from the Chinese perspective, but it never, ever brings in what happened outside of China. There is never the comparison with what happened outside of China. And the other interesting thing of this subgenre is that it inverts the dramatic tension that we saw before about the costs of healthcare, because here what is dramatized is that every cost and any cost of COVID treatment was borne by the state. So that becomes part of the narrative in there about the role of the state. So very briefly, core points. Yes, pedagogic mandate always present. B, it's more nuanced than we expect, and it doesn't stop short of presenting the negative externalities of the Chinese medical system in very explicit, dramatic, and sometimes even bloody ways that we could be a little bit taken aback when we imagine Chinese communication as pure propaganda. While adopting a strongly nationalistic perspective, Chinese medical dramas never show the Western world as a negative pole. They never do a negative comparison with the West, but you can see if you look within the lines, as we did with the role of foreign studying, there is a decentralization of the West as a paragon to China. And indeed, in the new TV series, including Ebola fighters, but also some new ones like Breath of Destiny, which just came out, they start to depict a world in which China has a lead role in medicine. So in which third world nations actually look up to China as a reference point and not anymore to the United States. So the implications of that are something that we are going to study in the next phases of this research. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for your presentation and for your punctuality. I don't know, maybe we can discuss all three works later, or you want to address your questions now? I don't know. Now? Later, yeah, since the other works is as well about COVID-19, maybe we can address the three works together. So may I present Esther Nadasi, Esther is an assistant professor at the Budapest University of Technology and Economics, Department of Sociology and Media Studies, and teaches at the Department of Philosophy and History of Science as well. She earned her PhD in 2021 at the, now you can help me, the name of the university?
Oh, that was Lawrence Science University.
I'm so sorry. With okay.
Okay.
And in 2019, she presented a paper at the Society for Philosophy and Technology Conference in Texas with the title, "The Power of Storytellers, Representation of Innovation in Medical Series." Her research on medical television series focuses on the representation of hospitals, healthcare workers, specialties, and technologies. She also studies historical medical series like the NEAD. Since 2017, she has been a member of the Budapest Workshop on Philosophy of Technology Organizing Committee. As a journalist, she regularly publishes medical and health-related articles.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for having me here. Can you hear me now? It's better like this. Okay. So thank you again for the introduction and having me here. So I'm a Hungarian researcher, but my work focuses on American medical series. Before discussing their COVID representation, let me share just a few details about Hungary's connection to this genre. So in 1989 is the year when our political system changed considerably. Before that, we had medical series like the Hospital at the End of the City from Czechoslovakia and the Schwarzwald Clinic from the Federal Republic of Germany. So after the system changed, in 1996, ER appeared on our screen. This is the first time when I saw a medical series. With one condition, I had to turn away when a trauma came in, so couldn't see the bloody details. And 1 year later, the two first broadcast channels appeared in Hungary. So since then, we have more American content, including medical series. So how to define this genre? I'm gonna use the definition of Lee and Taylor that says, prescriptive fictional entertainment television show in which the main events occur in hospitals. The main topics are the diagnosis and treatment of disease or injury. By this definition, Hungary has no medical TV series. We had a daily telenovel, partly in a hospital setting, but mainly that's it. So I'm focusing on medical television series from America, and now I want to share my research on their COVID representation. So in 2020, series with storyline based on the so-called reality or contemporary world had a tough choice. They had to decide whether to include COVID-19 into their narratives or not. And what is the right choice financially for television companies and emotionally for the audience? The exclusion to provide an opportunity to escape, or the inclusion to reflect on or share reality? The situation was slightly similar to the one that happened after 9/11, because back then, story creators had to decide whether to include this tragedy or not. There were passive reflection, for instance, the removal of the Twin Towers from the city views and opening credits. This is what happened in the case of Sex and the City, The Sopranos, and The Friends. But there is a considerable active reflection from Third Watch. This is a series about paramedics, firefighters, police officers, and creators of the show felt it is their duty to reflect on 9/11. So first, they had an episode in which the actors created reports with the real-life first responders, and then the narrative included 9/11, so the characters had their own 9/11 storylines. Okay, so following this line, this duty, this responsibility line, what can we say about medical drama TV series? Let me add a few things to the genre definition I provided earlier. So from the very beginning, from the 50s, medical series is to have a strong educational intention. Healthcare professionals were among show creators. There were medical storylines inspired by real-life cases. And from the beginning, there is an intention for realism and accuracy. For instance, medical series intend to show state-of-the-art medicine. They have hospital settings, medical equipment, an authentic disease and injury display. And since the ER, this representation become more naturalistic even. So here in the picture, you can see the New Amsterdam shooting, and it's partly shooted in the real Bellevue Hospital in New York. So you see the connection between real institution and medical dramas. So let's go to the research side. So as former studies show, medical series are information sources for the audience. They can work as education platforms. They affect the knowledge, the attitude, even the behavior of the viewers. And they form expectation toward healthcare workers about injuries, about diseases, healing, and several procedures. And these series are also ways to teach bioethics. So from a theory level, let's take cultivation theory because it's often used in medical series research. It says TV has a long-term effect in reality perception. I like to use the genre-specific cultivation theory. It's an extended version of the original theory by George Gardner. And it says different genres have differing perceived realism, are connected to different perceived realism. And let's add this theory to the genre elements of medical dramas. For instance, the realistic hospital setting, the proper medical equipment, the intention to educate with the state-of-the-art content. And by this, we can assume that the enhanced opportunity to teach the audience, and it's an enhanced cultivation effect. Furthermore, the audience is emotionally engaged with the storylines. They pay more attention to the content, and this also enhances the potential of entertainment education. So, in 2020, medical series tried to act responsibly. First, they donated their medical supplies to real hospitals because American hospitals were missing protective measures, and this series had their real ones. In March, the resident started with a title card that said the storyline about the hospital contamination has no connection with the current COVID situation. Any relationship to current events is completely coincidental. And they expressed their support to the real life doctors, healthcare workers, and nurses. In April, a New Amsterdam episode called Pandemic was cancelled. So it was about a fictional pandemic, and the creators felt it's not okay to show it. It's emotionally overwhelming for the audience and also potentially misguiding because it has different protocols from reality. So they decided to cancel. Okay, and now let's see the inclusion of COVID-19 not as a responsibility, but as an opportunity to creatively renew the genre. It's also a thing to consider from the creator's side. There are strategies to renew the genre, for instance, the hybridization with other genres, the introduction of new specialties, the creation of new hero types, and the fourth one is the adding real-life issues to the plot lines, whether these are medical issues or political ones. So finally, 5 of 5 ongoing American medical series decided to include COVID-19 into their narratives. Several creators felt and said in the newspapers, they felt it's their duty to do that. The number of COVID center episode vary series per series. The minimum is 2 and the maximum is 17. But despite this difference, all shows divided their COVID representation to 3 stages. I'm gonna elaborate on that. So my qualitative content analysis focuses on 2 television seasons from 2020 to 2022. And my aim was to find the common storylines. All right, let's start with the pre-crisis period, the first cases. These scenes are from the late 2019 and the early 2020. Back then, COVID is represented as a mysterious contagion far from America. And there are misdiagnosed patients with, influenza diagnosis. There are no safety measures. And this is the period when the virus spread freely in the hospital. The screen time is very, very short for this first period. Mostly, these scenes are just the beginning of the crisis-centered episodes. All right, let's see what narratives the crisis episode had. So, all series presented the overloaded hospitals, but what are these hospitals? Safe spaces or danger zones? So, since the very beginning of the 80th centuries, hospitals intend to be spaces of control, where the strict space structure helps to avoid contagion and helps the distribution of specialized care. Before it, hospitals used to be spaces of danger when the infection spread freely. In these episodes, hospitals are both safe spaces and danger zones because, for instance, healthcare workers get infection in their workplace during the treatment of COVID patient. You can see in the picture Meredith Grey, the protagonist of Grey's Anatomy. The hospital is a changing institution. Spatial arrangement, duties, and protocols are changing constantly during this episode. The ICU became the center of the treatment. Ad hoc COVID wards are established, and there are entry zones to the hospitals where the checks happening. The duty. So the collaborative work of doctors from different specialties happen, and residents get bigger duties than they should in a normal situation. Protocol-wise, we can say it's compulsory to wear the protective measures. There are restricted procedures like CPR, and online communication happen between doctors and patients and their relatives, their loved ones. Okay. This is the period when it's kind of the end of the miraculousness, because medical series are not as idealistic as they used to be at the very beginning of the genre, but they still tend to exaggerate the effectiveness of technologies and procedures like CPR, defibrillation, and ventilators. In this episode, the shortage is more admitted. There's less techno-optimism, no endless sources, knowledge, money, and equipment-wise. And it's a moral dilemma to decide who gets what. And as you see in the picture, when someone is safe and can leave the hospital, is an exceptional celebratory moment. So it's not work as usual. Let's talk about the post-crisis aftermath period. And first, how to get this point according to the series. First, the heroism of healthcare workers, of course. Second, science can help us. Vaccination is presented as an opportunity to end the crisis. And lay people. So, keeping protocols, trusting science is a way to end the COVID crisis according to the narratives. And pandemic as a scam belief is represented, but only to dispel it by the narrative. Okay. After 2 or 3 crisis-centered episodes, 2 medical series declared that their story words not gonna follow COVID anymore, and they are COVID-free, and they relocated their story word into the imaginary positive future. The Good Doctor used title cards, and this title card said they show a fictional story of a real battle. They expressed their honor to the healthcare workers, and said, do your part, wear a mask. Freddie Highmore, the protagonist, dressed as Dr. Murphy, appeared in an episode and said, "The episode is a hope for a future without COVID, and protect yourself until then." The resident also had a title, Disclaimers, and said the storyline is based in a future when COVID is a history, and they also expressed the dedication to the healthcare workers. Wow, it seemed to be a division, a big change, a new subgenre, because we could differentiate between COVID-free and non-COVID-free medical series. Interestingly, COVID appeared slightly in the dogwood detector. So in one episode, there was a post-COVID patient, and they had a doctor with PTSD from treating COVID patients. And as you see, the resident also had episodic reflection on COVID, a patient who misses appointments, a trachea complication of an intubated COVID patient, and the patient was denied to get a transplanted organ because of his vaccination status. But still, we had these declarations, and these declarations are still dividing the series because they differentiate the... Okay, it's gonna... Right, so declaration, right. So let's just say a few things about the other three series and their post-COVID words. So they presented only one COVID-19 crisis wave. We know it was not the case in most countries in reality. For instance, in Hungary, we had 3 COVID waves. So, but in the series, it's a kind of a difference. Chicago Med still have a COVID word, and there are references to the COVID department in the hospital. The Grey's Anatomy had a whole season about the post-COVID consequences, like health, economical, emotional effects of COVID. Season 18 reflected on this. And New Amsterdam followed the vaccination of New York-based citizens and how poor people are victims of scams and so on. Okay, after the COVID narratives, I compared the storylines that are central beyond COVID in these 2 television seasons. What do I mean with central storylines? Storylines that are longer than 1 episode, so not episodic. Cases appear regularly in the series, and common topics of the 2 or 3 series. So what the good doctor and the residents have in common is the hospital ownership, the finance, the residency program, the experimental surgeries, therapies, cutting-edge technologies and trials, cancer treatment, and cyber attack. Adding to this, the good doctor dealt with dementia, autism, blood shortage, and miscarriage. The resident focused more on multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, Huntington, rehabilitation, and palliative care. About the 3 other series, you can see there are storyline similarities with the former 2 series. New Amsterdam focused more on psychiatric cases, the dangers of the hospital building, and Grey's Anatomy focused on Parkinson and euthanasia. Okay, so in summary, we can say about COVID representation on a content level that medical series represented COVID-19 with a strong educative manner. They stood up for scientific approaches and safety protocols, and they were really keen to divide the fictitious part from reality. On paratextual level, you can see an example behind us. So there were direct, strong educative content like the Grey's Anatomy MARC tutorial to hand sanitizing. And this is parallel with the beginning of the genre, like in the 80s, the strongness of the educative content. And finally, about the non-COVID storylines, let's just summarize these as well. So we see the storyline similarities. The differences come from the original profile of the series, like their specialty focus. For instance, New Amsterdam is more focused on psychiatrics. Chicago Med is more about ED. The non-episodic storylines are mostly connected to the main characters, to their career or their private life, and techno-optimism is back after COVID. You can see it in the treatment and research. And finally, the creators took responsibility again, because they embodied very strong comeback to the hospital storyline in order to avoid the next healthcare crisis. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for sharing your work. I will now present the last work. You can do,
or I can take the microphone.
we can switch places now. Yeah, let
Okay.
me introduce you.
Okay.
Just Allegra Sonego. Sonego is a visual performing and media arts PhD student at the Alma Mater Study Room of Bologna since November 2022. She's working on a dissertation on USA medical drama within the PRIN 2020 project, Narrative Ecosystem Analysis and Development Framework, a systemic approach to contemporary serial product, the medical drama case. Her latest publication is Tribunali e Giustizia nelle narrazioni seriali prime time statunitense. Sorry. So can we switch places and you can present your job?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for your introduction. This contribution is part COVID-19 narrative engine and characters embedding is part of a wider PRIN 2020 NEAD project on narrative ecosystems. In particular, I took as a starting point the work of Pescatore and Rocchi, published in Nature in 2022. They investigated the storytelling of 8 medical dramas by identifying 3 main narrative isotopies, professional, sentimental, and medical cases plot, showing the strength of the medical genre and its ability to build, rebuild in its microcosm, the human one, when where everyday life elements mix and overlaps with working and social relationships. They proved that the 3 isotopies, that the 3 isotopies are good descriptors for the medical genre, and measured the narrative biomass and identified 4 possible narrative profiles: the SOAP, the doctors and patients, the anthology, and the social formula. Now, in support of the research hypothesis that I will explain, there are several features of the medical TV series. The first concerns the fact that broadcast TV series are permeable and open, and so are able to absorb elements of reality and rework them into the narration. The medical drama then has a narrative structure that allows and endorses the introduction of new characters and innovative elements. And finally, the fact that medical is a genre with a strong pedagogical and educational intent, but socially relevant themes are depicted, are little investigated, with some exceptions such as abortion or depiction of African Americans. So the idea behind the research hypothesis is that the theme not only integrate into the narration, but have a role of narrative engine. This is possible thanks to the entry of the theme in the characters, entry that modifies the narrative trajectory. The embodiment of the character produces new narrative arcs. They have as a starting point the theme, but become independent when they develop. From this assumption arose a research project with a threefold objective: identify and define the main social themes in medical drama, quantify their narrative presence, and demonstrate their ability to generate narrative arcs involving characters. At this stage of the research, 10 socially relevant themes have been identified. Some examples are racism, abortion, or gender-based violence. So this contribution is only the first step of the work. And so the aims are mentioning the theoretical framework, give a first definition of theme, illustrate the protocol used to conduct the analysis, and discuss the results. We are guided by two research questions. The first one concerns the quantification of narrative biomass of COVID isotopy, and the second is about the correlation of COVID isotopy with the main narrative lines. The goal is to obtain formulas that can describe how COVID is depicted in this TV series. The hypothesis is that the pandemic, according to the TV series considered, could be represented in a pathetic, professional, or environmental key. The first step is about the definition of theme. We follow three different directions. We start from a semantic fundamental dichotomy, figurative level, thematic level. Figurativeness gives rise to gradual manifestations depending on the use that the discourse makes. However, for this level to be understood by the user, the thematic level is necessary. The theme indeed gives meaning and value to the figures. The notion of theme can also be meant in this context as a configuration, a kind of micro-story capable of being integrated into wider discursive units, with the difference that in the case of an open serial product, configuration generate narration and are not generated by it. As for the TV series, or rather the narrative ecosystems, the theme takes on a narrative role. From a textual point of view, COVID will be referred as an isotopy in a narrative sense, so its meaning is analogous to the term plot. Indeed, it's possible to talk about figurative and thematic isotopies. The COVID theme can be considered the thematic one, located at a deeper and more abstract level, and so the more general plot. And its manifestations can be defined as figurative isotopies, declined in a more concrete way, and so the more specific plots, such as symptoms of patients and professionals, or a scarcity of medical supplies. The corpus was selected considering the seasons dealing with COVID from 4 medical TV series of US prime time. So we have Chicago Med, Grey's Anatomy, New Amsterdam, and The Good Doctor. So we have a total of 4 TV series, 4 seasons, and 32 episodes. As you can see in the timeline, we then made a distinction between pandemic and post-pandemic episodes, taking as a point of differentiation the administration of vaccines. The methodology chosen is quantitative content analysis, widely used in the context of media. We developed a protocol to measure the biomass of the theme. As for the analysis units, we used those previously collected by Pescatore and Rocchi in order to easily compare data. We then assigned the segments containing COVID several subcodes that we will see, and a weight from 1 to 6. The weight was then converted in time to measure the presence of the theme within the playing time. And finally, we quantified the time of the individual segment devoted to COVID distributed on the main narrative lines. Aside from these steps, we track the character presence on screen to identify the entry point of the theme. Okay, we will now focus on subcodes that will be present in the results discussion. The first subcode is the most generic one and refers to all protocols put in place to contain the virus, such as triage before entering the ER or distribution of protection devices. The second takes into consideration all the consequences that the pandemic has had on mental health of both doctors and patients, such as mental breakdown, PTSD, or problems in returning to post-COVID normality. Subcode C3 covers the more strictly medical aspects, in particular contagion, virus symptoms, and discharges. And the other subcode related to the disease itself, it's C5, which refers to the death of professional and patients, for example, lung failure or long COVID. Also, the subcode of vaccines, C7, is part of the medical sphere and includes vaccine administration or discussion of vaccines. All cases of scarcity of medical supplies fall into, such as lack of masks, tampons, or drugs, fall under subcode C4. And we have more related to the sentimental aspect, the subcode C6, the subcode of the human relationships modified by COVID, for example, video calls or love stories that become long distance. And finally, as for the professional sphere, the consequences of the pandemic on the hospital system fit in the subcode C8. Now, the first results to be evaluated are those of the time devoted to COVID isotropy on the total playtime of the episodes considered. As you can see in the chart, Chicago Med, in Chicago Med, the COVID time percentage is about 19%. More generally, this number is justified by the fact that although hospital management of pandemic is depicted, other narrative lines are simultaneously present, such as medical cases, personal crisis, and opening of a new medical trial. In Grey's Anatomy, the percentage of COVID isotropy is a bit higher, with 32%. The high value is mainly due to two factors. On one hand, the whole season is dedicated to pandemic, and on the other, the theme enters and is developed through some main characters, among which Meredith Grey, Miranda Bailey, and Tom Koracic. As for New Amsterdam, only the first minutes of the first episode are dedicated to the full COVID emergency. Indeed, images of all the elements of pandemic are shown on screen, such as first cases, mental collapses, administration of vaccines. And this explains the value of COVID isotropy of 25%. In the case of The Good Doctor, then only the first two episodes are set in the pandemic rush. In fact, it is then announced by actor Freddie Highmore that starting from episode 3, the TV series imagines a future in which the virus is under control. However, the value of COVID isotropy is equal to 41 because the first two episodes count respectively 84 and 60% of COVID isotropy on total playtime, and this drives the total percentage. This other chart in the slide shows all the percentages of subcodes present on the total COVID isotropy per series. As for Grey's Anatomy, emerge as the highest values C2 and C3. As already explained in the previous slide, Meredith Grey catalyzes all the attention of the series, as well in minor part Tom Koracic. However, not only main characters tested positive to COVID, but also several patients are treated for the virus. Also in Chicago Med, the two subcodes there have the highest value are C2 and C3, with 33% each. This product, even before COVID, often had the focus on mental health. And in the episodes dedicated to pandemic, the psychiatrist invites all colleagues to therapy session to talk about psychological relapses of the virus. The strong presence of code C3 is motivated by the focus on COVID ward. Dr. Choi, Dr. Lanik, and Nurse Sexton work intensively to beat the pandemic, during which they lose many patients and discharge others. The code with the lowest percentage is C7 because the vaccines are only mentioned in the 5th episode. Unlike all other series, New Amsterdam have the highest value in the subcode C8 with 25% of value. It focuses on the damage of the hospital to the hospital system caused by the virus and on careers of professionals. For example, delays in checkups or the return of Reynolds from San Francisco. A value that instead seems to be in line with the other products is the code C2 with 20%. And this theme finds its expression especially in the difficulty of returning to post-COVID normality. Lastly, the results of The Good Doctor that are consistent with previous ones. Okay. With the previous ones, the C3 code is in fact the highest, with a value of 37%, and focuses on the first 2 episodes that see the team at the front line. Then code C6 is the second one of the human relationships, with 25% of presence. Because some relationships become long presence, long distance, such as Leah and Sean, and others get complicated, like the one of Park with Mia and their son. To be noted that the subcode related to vaccine is completely absent. The last step of the results evaluation requires the identification of narrative formulas that can describe how COVID theme is distributed on the main narrative lines: professional, sentimental, and medical cases plot. 3 types of depiction are expected: pathetic, professional, and environmental. Starting from Chicago Med, the distribution of the COVID theme focuses on the isotropy of medical cases, with a value of 48%. The data are justified, as previously said, by the fact that the most present subcodes are C2 and C3, and these 2 subthemes involve both patients and professionals, so they see in some cases overlaps between medical cases and sentimental plot. The 2 TV series that feature prevalence of COVID isotropy on the sentimental one are Grey's Anatomy and The Good Doctor, with 47% and 48%. As regards the first one, there are several elements that motivate the data. The most present subcodes are C2 and C3 again, but there are more main characters who get sick or who have relatives tested positive. And in addition, the sentimental plot is called into question by many mental breakdowns of the medical staff, such as Korasik, Bailey, and Hunt. The value of COVID isotropy on medical cases with 36% remains very high due to the frequent overlaps between SP and MC. From The Good Doctor emerges that the sentimental plot is very similar to the previous series. In this case, however, it is also due to code C6. Very high also the value of COVID on medical cases, with 45%, focused on the first 2 episodes, which we already discussed. The last product to be investigated is New Amsterdam. The COVID theme falls mainly on the professional plot. And this is consistent with the prevailing code, that is C8, which summarizes the impact of pandemic on hospital system. Based on these results, we then obtained these possible narrative formulas. The pathetic, in which the depiction of pandemic is mainly includes the declination of sentimental plot, such as couple relationships, friendships, or personal crisis, and both Grey's Anatomy and The Good Doctor fit this description. The professional, in which the focus is on the aspect of management of the pandemic by hospitals, and social injustice caused by the virus. And this depiction can be found in the TV series New Amsterdam. The last one, environmental, in which the theme is represented from a medical point of view, with a focus on the ontological plot, and a more frequent presence of patients. And in this category falls Chicago Med. It should be noted that referring to the work of Pescatore and Rocchi on US medical dramas, the results of the depiction of COVID isotropy and its distribution on main narrative lines are consistent with the previous results. In fact, Chicago Med is part of the doctors and patients formula. Grey's Anatomy belongs to the SOAP one, and New Amsterdam to the social one. The only exception is The Good Doctor. But the 2 researchers in the paper mention a possible reversal in narrative trend that could bring this series closer to Grey's Anatomy. In conclusion, the future perspective of the research are to extend the analysis on the other socially relevant themes and to measure their presence into the narration. And secondly, to implement a protocol able to trace the narrative arcs generated by the themes and the characters embedding. Thanks for your attention. Okay. Very much.
Well, thank you very much for all the presenters. Now we can discuss, I don't know if we have 5 minutes, 10 minutes. We have 10 minutes to discuss these reworks. So maybe if anyone, we have the first question or comment.
Question for Matteo. My name is Michael Guarneri. Xi Jinping and the whole Chinese Communist Party are a bunch of liars, manipulators, thieves, and murderers who deserve to end up in the trash bin of history. If we study their propaganda tools and techniques without communicating the results to the Chinese people themselves, our efforts somehow end up being a little bit empty and masturbatory. So a question for Matteo, how do you think we can reach the Chinese people? Thank you.
Shall we collect or shall I reply one by one? One by one, okay. Thank you for your question. I do not subscribe to a simplistic, well, what I consider to be an oversimplistic representation of the current state of the People's Republic of China. But I must stress that the People's Republic of China has no problem in accessing our scientific production whatsoever. So when I was living there, I had no problems at all in accessing through JSTOR and Google Scholar, whatever publication I needed. So this occasion and other similar occasions, but also the simple publication of our research results are already pretty good instruments, especially as academics, in terms of getting out to the Chinese people. This having been said, it's not within the objectives of this research project to do a deconstruction of Chinese propaganda methods or infrastructures, as much as isolating and studying the cultural, political, and social relevance of a specific cultural product and of a specific segment of Chinese cultural industry, which to me are two very different objectives. And one can follow the other in the sense that a critique of propaganda can follow a scientific understanding of the workings of texts and cultural industries. But to me, it's very dangerous to reverse them. So to start from the idea that you need to deconstruct the propaganda and then have the analysis follow down on that. Those are my 2 cents. But of course, I'm reacting to your input, but it's such a wide-ranging question that we could debate this for hours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any other question here? Yes.
Thank you. A question again for Matteo. I'm Elisa Farinacci from Università of Bologna. So you discussed the relationship with the West and Western medicine. I was wondering if in those TV series, those products that you analyzed, there were any interactions with doctors from outside the Republic of China. If there were American doctors or if there were Chinese doctors who studied medicine abroad in the Western countries, and what's the relationship there, if there is any? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, of 2 general typologies. Number one, there is the relationship with Chinese doctors that studied abroad. So as I briefly hinted in my presentation, what happens there is that there is always a narrative of return. So these students studied abroad and then returned. And as they returned, they are changed by the impact with China, and change usually for the better. Whereas in the series between especially the early to mid 2000s, it was the opposite. So they came back and somehow shook things up where they came back, right? So that's exactly the change that you can see. In our sample, we observed very little, actually, to my recollection, no interaction with Western characters, as in Western actors playing Western characters. There are a couple of characters which, again, spend time abroad or are even American nationals, but of Chinese descent. And third, however, there is this new genre that is emerging of global medical drama. And there you have a lot of interaction with African doctors and African people in Ebola fighters, in which, as I was describing, there is a strongly paternalistic view of Africa in there. There is a rather explicit critique of Western colonialism in there. That's the only instance in which the West is explicitly referenced, especially in terms of its indifference to the Ebola epidemics in Africa in the 19th and in the year 2000s. So those are the only examples that come to my mind.
Sorry, can you please present yourself? Thank you.
It was just the enthusiasm. Yes, I'm Luca Prono from Bologna University. I was particularly interested in these TV series that you mentioned at the end of your paper and just now. I was just wondering whether these circulate only within China or whether they are sold abroad and they act as a sort of ambassador to China's politics.
Thank you very much. This opens a whole Pandora's box, which is about the exportability of Chinese TV series, which is currently very low. But it's growing because of the hunger for content of several streaming services. Now, you can follow most of these series on YouTube if you speak Chinese, because most of them are there without English subtitles, but they are there. Okay, so, but they are not sold to YouTube. I mean, they are uploaded by users with the full support of the Chinese producers, which are looking, and if you look at the 14th five-year plan for television production, it's clearly stated they are looking to improve the exportability of their products. This having been said, some of them have reached, my understanding, Amazon Prime Video. I think one of them has reached there, but not Ebola fighters, for example. That's not there. Even though it's rather well shot and it looks like a very expensive TV series, particularly for Chinese standards. There are a number of reasons against the exportability of Chinese TV series, and whenever they tried, they failed to export them. It's a long discussion, but it has mostly to do with the way they are shot and also the format, because they tend to be 20 or 40 episodes of 1 hour long. So they're quite extensive and it requires quite a strong investment in time. But short answer, no.
Thank you very much. We have another question, Dr. Manfilotto. You have the microphone there.
So maybe question, maybe comments for all of you. Matteo, you said they don't mix Chinese traditional medicine and Western medicine. And this also fits with the clinical situation, because in the hospitals, they really try to divide, to split the two approaches to the clinic. And the other interesting thing that you said is that the approach to synthesize the American thinking. Also, if you quote Deng Xiaoping, who said they, if I understood well, they are going to change those who come back from America. They are going to change China. I think that maybe is happening the opposite. to Esther, as I well understood, at the very beginning, the programs, medical dramas and programs were trying to hide the situation due to COVID, or even to describe as less critical than it was. But the final message you gave, the one back to the hospital, that's very important also from the educational point of view. And the last question or comment is for Esther. Very, very good, excellent, your approach, methodological approach to analyze, very analytical, and I appreciate it very much. I enjoyed the description that you made: pathetic, professional, environmental. What I'm very critical about is when the pathetic approach is prevalent. I prefer the professional and environmental, more descriptive than, I mean, that's less TV maybe, because in TV, yeah, I know that's the reason we discuss very often with my friend Professor Pescatori, but I don't like this pathetic approach. But anyway, that's TV. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation, because the international landscape is very, very interesting.
Thank you very much for your comment. Maybe we can close the table with this comment. I thank you very much for. Esther or Allegra? Do you want to respond anything? To add anything? Do you want to add a comment? Okay, maybe we can discuss in the coffee break. Thank you very much. Oh.
So I think we can resume our conference. A very good afternoon to everybody, to those in presence and to those online that are still with us. I thank everybody to be here. I'm Cristina De Maria from the Departments of the Arts, University of Bologna, and I'm really glad to chair panel number 3. And I want to thank also the two organizers, Stefania and Marta, and Guglielmo. I'm learning already a lot from this conference. In this panel, we go on analyzing gender roles. We already talked about gender medicine and gender body. But with our first speaker that I'm going to introduce immediately, we are going to speak about masculinities and paternal roles. So Marie Moureau, the first speaker, is a lecturer in North American Studies in the Language Department of the Université Jean-Moulin Lyon 3. She obtained a PhD from Université Paris 3 Sorbonne Nouvelle and wrote her dissertation on the evolution of family in the United States, Canada, and Quebec between 1969 and 2005. Her research focuses on gender and family roles and representations, as well as social, moral, sexual, and family values in the United States and Canada. And recently, she has more particularly been working on involved fatherhood. The title of the presentation is From Paternalism to Paternity, the Portrayal of Fatherhood in Medical Drama TV Series, ER, Grey's Anatomy, New Amsterdam. Please, Marie, you know that you have 20 minutes and we will open the debate at the end of the 3 presentations.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the presentation. So today we'll talk about fatherhood, and more particularly fatherhood in ER, Grey's Anatomy, and New Amsterdam. Research that's been carried out since the 1970s on gendered portrayals on television has consistently found that female characters are most likely to have interpersonal roles in TV shows, that is to say, roles involving romance and family, marriage, children, etc. Whereas male characters are more likely to have work roles, and thus maintaining the gender stereotypes in TVs. Medical dramas, because they're set in a professional environment, could be seen as a way to erase this gender bias, considering all characters are set in a professional environment, men and women alike. However, studies have demonstrated that even in professional settings, these gender stereotypes remain. For instance, women are shown as having
interpersonal actions rather than professional decisions such as socializing, reassuring, listening, counseling, etc., etc. So in other words, even though women are present in the workplace, they're still really attached to their domestic role and attributes. So to assess whether medical TV shows are contributing to gender stereotypes, I'd like to take the other way around and see to what extent men are shown performing interpersonal relations and actions and given domestic attributes in the shows, and more particularly because women have mostly been portrayed as mothers. I'd like to see how men are portrayed as fathers. So in order to do so, I focused on 3 TV shows spanning over the last 3 decades. ER, that started, let me use that thing, that started in the 1990s and ran for 15 seasons. Grey's Anatomy, that started in 2005, still airing, and New Amsterdam, that started in 2018 to 2023. The reason I chose ER is because it's considered as one of the first post-paternalistic medical dramas in which male doctors are shown as struggling with their jobs, but also with their personal lives and especially families. I chose Grey's Anatomy because the self-proclaimed post-feminist Shonda Rhimes, creator and producer of Grey's Anatomy, has really put the emphasis on depicting gendered equalitarian relationships and gender and equalitarian fathers. And finally, the reason I chose New Amsterdam is because the plot revolves around the main character, that is Dr. Max Goodwin, and he ends up being a single father after his wife passes after giving birth. So analyzing these characters in these 3 shows should enable us to see whether the portrayal of fatherhood in medical TV series challenges traditional and hegemonic representations of masculinity and stereotypes. I'd like to start with how these shows are moving the professional and private line along the gender line. Over the last decades in the US, there's been a blurring of the line between the private sphere and the public sphere that can be mainly attributed to the fact that starting in the 1970s, women massively entered the labor workforce, and particularly mothers did, which really showed that parenthood and work could be reconciled to a certain extent, of course. And as a result, the line between the domestic lives and the professional lives of people started to be blurred, and it initiated more equalitarian gender roles, with women and men both having legitimate claims over the professional sphere. And in reaction, men gradually having the possibility to have legitimate claims over the domestic sphere. The possibility, I'm saying. While men's identity remains strongly associated with their jobs, the opening scenes of our 3 shows reflect the process of gradually decorrelating masculinity and professional attributes. In the older show, ER, in the mid-1990s, we see Mark Green clearly identified as a doctor and set in his professional environment. A few years after, the opening scene of Grey's Anatomy shows a very private scene between Meredith Grey and Derek Shepherd in a private place, Meredith's home, without any indication of their professional status. And it's the same for New Amsterdam, where the first image the viewer gets to see is of Max's phone. So we learn about his relationship before even learning what his profession is and that he's a doctor. So male doctors are no longer uniquely defined by their profession. However, it's possible for them to move past that dichotomy between job and family. Male doctors can have it all. They can care for their family while being strongly committed to their careers. As the regular depiction of Max Goodwin in New Amsterdam, having his baby in a baby carrier with his professional ID pinned on the baby carrier shows, so they can reconcile their job and their family. And in addition, it's quite the opposite, because Max is really shown as being really efficient in his job while caring for his baby. In this scene, for instance, he's organizing a really important staff meeting and making really important decisions while feeding and burping his baby at the same time. Super efficient. So these domestic attributes can now be part of the identities of male characters, because as women were becoming professionally empowered, American men were also encouraged to take a more active role at home. They did not, of course, cross the domestic line to the same extent as women crossed the public line. Yet the reports show that men are now spending more time at home and especially taking care of their kids. And that's what our 3 medical shows reflect. They depict really involved fathers. And again, the 3 shows, in the 3 shows, we can see the evolution through the decades, starting with ER. And ER, fathers are shown as trying to be involved in their kids' lives, while mostly failing because of how absorbed they are by the hospital. At the beginning of the show, for instance, Dr. Mark Green is shown as struggling, and he's presented as a family man who's trying to maintain a family life with his wife and daughter, despite his long hours in the ER. And when his wife and daughter move away to Milwaukee, he's in Chicago, he tries to commute for a year with no success. Ambitious surgeon Peter Benton also fights several custody battles to be involved in his kid life. So they're trying. In New Amsterdam and Grey's Anatomy, they're not trying, they're fully embracing paternity. In Grey's Anatomy, gender equality is pushed quite far by Shonda Rhimes, mostly. And in Grey's Anatomy, we have characters that seem more willing to have children than the female characters. Derek Shepherd is the one leading in the adoption process of Zola, the couple's first kid. Owen Hunt is the one pushing his first 2 wives to have kids. And when they refuse, they get a divorce. And when they refuse, that eventually leads him to adopt a kid alone. Link is the one pushing his partner to have other children. She refuses and they separate. In New Amsterdam, it's the same thing. Dr. Iggy Frome loves having children so much that even though he already has 4, he goes on with an adoption procedure without telling his husband, etc., etc. Pediatrician Doug Ross in ER is a notable exception in this landscape of involved fathers. In the first season, we learned that he has a son whom he has never seen and whose name he doesn't even know. And interestingly, executive producer of ER said that choosing this plot for Doug Ross was a way to reflect the reality of a lot of men that he saw around him that were not involved in their kids' lives. So that's a reflection of 1990s dads. The conditions have changed since the 1990s, and in New Amsterdam and Grey's Anatomy, most fathers of these shows have integrated that, and most of them blame their own fathers for being negligent. They want to be better than their absentee fathers. Mark Green, for instance, has a very strained relationship with his dad. He accuses him of choosing his career over his family, while almost doing the same thing. Doug Ross's father abandoned his family when he was a kid. In Grey's Anatomy, it's the same thing. Alex Kureff's dad was a violent alcoholic and drug addict who left him with his schizophrenic mother. Jackson's Avery his dad abandoned his son after he divorced his mom. In New Amsterdam, it's the same. Floyd Reynolds grew up without a father. Iggy Frome feels unloved by a father who never accepted that he was gay, etc. And for all these men, missing or resenting their absentee or negligent father is a major storyline in their characterization, and it's a regular topic in several episodes. And because they know what it feels like to be abandoned or to have a deficient father, they want to, this new generation of dads, they want to mend the past, they want to be better, and they blame themselves when they do not succeed, when they are not good enough fathers according to their own standards. That's, for instance, the storyline of a neurosurgeon, Vijay Kapoor in New Amsterdam. He's one of the older doctors. So he had a traditional way of raising his son, and he blames himself for not being a caring enough father for his son. And he intends to, he wants to redeem himself by being a better grandfather to his son's child. There's also a redemptive dimension in that character of Doug Ross, who tries to make amends for being an absentee father. And still according to the executive producer of ER, it's the reason why he decided to care for children and become a pediatrician in order to redeem himself. But the best 2 examples maybe of fathers mending the past are probably Mark Green from ER and Alex Kureff from Grey's Anatomy. When Mark Green learns that he has a terminal cancer, he decides to spend his last days trying to fix his relationship with his daughter, and trying to be the father that he wished he had been. So he apologizes for not being present enough, etc. And when Lex Karef discovers that his ex-wife, Izzy Stevens, had kids whom he didn't know he had, he abandons everything right away, including his wife, to go with them and to raise them. And that's what he explains in a really long letter that I won't read, but he explicitly mentions that the reason why he chose to join his kids was to be the father that he wished he had had, by saying, for instance, I need to give these kids the family you and I never had, barbecuing out on the porch, etc. So this ideal family that he wants to build and that he didn't have. And that leads me to my next part, where I want to show you how fatherhood in these shows challenges the traditional hegemonic representations of masculinity. Because this junior generation of fathers are portrayed as being full hands-on dads, not just loving dads or fun dads, because these would fit the description of the patriarchal expectations of fathers just playing with them or loving them. But here we have a nurturing dads that care for their children, often babies, which is rare. For instance, we see them feeding their babies, burping them, carrying them in baby carriers, which are quite unusual images for fathers in TV shows, pushing strollers, kissing them. So here that was in New Amsterdam, and here you have it in Grey's Anatomy. And what's more surprising is that they embrace this nurturing paternity in plain sight, in their professional setting, in front of and with the validation of their male colleagues. So it's something that is accepted and valued. So some elements of traditional masculinity are challenged by the way fatherhood is portrayed here. And for instance, bodily and gendered norms are questioned in Grey's Anatomy with Owen and Teddy's son, Leo, who exhibits signs of gender fluidity, and Owen fully supports that. For instance, here, Owen's mother asks him why Leo is wearing a tutu, and he simply answers, because he likes tutus. And then when Leo regularly wears costumes, Owen goes with it. And for instance, here he called him a cowgirl. When he's wearing his Frozen costume, he calls him Elsa. If you know Frozen, you know what I mean. And when Teddy expresses doubts about Leo's gender fluidity, Owen is the one defending his son by saying, well, if Leo says he's a girl, I'm just going to listen. We have to follow his lead. So these fathers question hegemonic masculinity also by accepting to be weak and vulnerable. And this is the case of neurosurgeon Tom Karasik, who's portrayed as someone who's really arrogant and sexist, not a really likable character. But then everything changes when we learn that he had a 10-year-old son who died in an accident. And when he's admitting that, he's really shown as being emotional and vulnerable and crying. And then it changes the way we see it, because he's shown as a wounded dad, and that humanizes him. Because in the show, men are really commended for showing signs of weakness and accepting their flaws. And in Grey's Anatomy, in ER and New Amsterdam, male doctors are shown as being fallible on a professional level, but also on a personal level. They go through depression, they go through addiction, they make mistakes. And as the actor who plays Max Goodwin, Ryan Eggold, explains, he really wanted to play a doctor that was just a human being and not, I quote, a knight in shining armor, to reflect how doctors are not infallible. And this shift away from the figure of the doctor hero is quite recent. In all the medical shows, the doctor hero figure was a constant reminder that doctors were nice and caring about their patients and family. And this was a really idealistic and paternalistic portrayal that began to change in the mid-1990s, especially with ER, with depictions of physicians that were revealing occasional uncertainties in diagnoses, but also exposing unflattering personal characteristics. And that that contrasted sharply with previous portrayals of physicians that were portrayed as super doctors. But something that, so right from the start, doctors in ER in New Amsterdam as presented as fallible men, fallible family men, even, because 2 minutes into the pilot of ER, we learned that Mark Green is having troubles with his wife. So that's one of the first things we know, except that he's a doctor, he's struggling with his wife. And quite soon in the pilot of New Amsterdam, we know that Max Goodwin is separated from his pregnant wife, Georgia. And we know that it's because of something Max did. It's because Max chose to put his job first when he said that he would support Georgia in having a kid. So he says, I was wrong. He admits being wrong. One feature, however, that endures, one feature of the doctor hero that remains in the contemporary depictions of fathers is the idea of self-sacrifice. And that's why I'd like to say that we moved from doctor heroes to father heroes. They remain heroes, but for their family. These fathers are really gifted doctors. They're talented, they're ambitious. They want to work for their career. However, they're ready to sacrifice everything, even their career, when the sake of their children has to come first. For Pete Benton in ER, he's portrayed throughout the show as being overly ambitious and career-oriented, but when he fights a custody battle with his son, he risks losing because of the long hours that he does, and he resigns to go to a lower status hospital where he will work less. In Grey's Anatomy, we've already talked about Lex Karev, that abandoned everything. As for Max Goodwin, during the depiction of the COVID-19 episodes, he's shown as a kind of a martyr, sacrificing himself by sending his daughter away from New York to his parents-in-law, and with no possibility of seeing her. And he's saying, I have to save everyone before I will be able to save her. So his parents-in-law accuse him of being an unfit father for not taking care of her, but the viewer gets to see him as a hero, because selflessness and self-sacrifice are typical attributes of heroic figures. And it's also a characteristic that we can expect from traditional depiction of masculine values. It's something that's valued in masculinity. And by being martyrs or father heroes, these doctors claim back elements of hegemonic masculinity that had been softened by previous nurturing depictions of their fatherhood. All the more so that, as for any typical heroic figures, the idea of a righteous fight is also present in the shows. For instance, in this case, fighting for their children, never giving up on them. In all shows, we have the idea of fighting in custody battles to be involved in their kids' lives. And more interestingly, we have that figure of Max Goodwin that is precisely embodying the knight in shining armor that he didn't want to be. But when he's in a custody battle with his former parents-in-law about the custody of his daughter, Luna, he really embodies that fighting spirit here. I will never stop fighting for my daughter. I will fight for her until the day I die. Now I'm here to take her home. And he takes her home. So here you have the idea that by giving such a striking demonstration of strength, determination, force, power, and by embodying a righteous fight, Max's character reconciles the caring dimension of his fatherhood with more traditional values of masculinity. And I will conclude in a few seconds by saying that the impact of these father portrayals on the audience and on gender roles, I think, is pretty important, because several studies show that the viewers respond to characters that are shown as being fallible, but also fathers and male viewers respond positively to characters that are showed as being powerful, dominant, sexually attractive, and virile. And that's the case of these doctors. So by reconciling this nurturing dimension, but some more traditional, powerful aspects of masculinity, they can positively influence, I think, viewers in their fatherhood by being more caring and nurturing. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It was an extremely interesting paper. I think this idea of self-sacrifice is something we go back to, because also women sacrifice. But do they self-sacrifice? We can go back to that later. Now we move to Chiara Cecaglini's presentation. Let me just introduce Chiara, that is a postdoc research fellow at the Università degli Studi di Urbino, Carlo, Department of Communication Sciences, Humanities and International Studies. She's also adjunct professor of international reception of Italian cinema at the Università di Bologna. Her research interests revolve around contemporary serial narratives from different perspectives. She has recently focused on girls' representation in teen series, but also on audiovisual content forms of distribution and reception, online and offline audience practices. She wrote already many articles, and I just want to mention that she authored the book Breaking Bad, La chimica del male, storia, temi, stile, published in 2014. And the title of her presentation is Black Holes and Salvation, Youth and Mental Health in Italian TV Series. Please.
Thank you. Thanks. First, of course, I would like to thank all the participants to this conference, but most of all the organizers for having me. And I'll start saying that I recently joined the University of Urbino research unit of the already mentioned PRIN project NEAD framework, a systemic approach to contemporary serial products, the medical drama case, that has, of course, with a PI, Professor Guglielmo Pescatore. And while the object of Urbino's unit is the Italian medical drama, along with the China and the US geographical area from other units, and particularly reception and a social discourse around these Italian medical dramas. But while my work with this line of inquiry is just beginning, so for this talk, I tried to combine it with another parallel research interest of mine that I've been pursuing for the past year, also with the supervision of Professor Stefania Antonioni. So the research on teen dramas and teenagers representation in Italian series. So combining these considerations, I decided to address the topic of fictional representation of mental health, which, looking at the Italian context, appears to be recurringly associated with adolescents and youth. So as a sort of disclaimer, it's worth noting that contrary to American TV series, where storylines centered on mental health issues and mental disorders have been incorporated within different types of narratives, from comedies like the already mentioned Crazy Ex-Girlfriend to animated series like BoJack Horseman, and also spy thrillers like Homeland. In Italy, the topic of mental health is mainly explored within the frame of hospital dramas, it seems, with some exceptions, of course, like Nico's storyline in Scam Italia. Therefore, this hospital frame also allows to reflect on the formal and content boundaries of the genre of medical drama. So I decided to focus on 2019 Mediaset drama Oltre la Soglia, 2020 Rai Play teen series Mental, and 2022 Netflix adaptation of Daniele Mencarelli's book Tutto chiede salvezza, although this last series is exceeding the teenage years because the protagonist is in his 20s, but is still a young adult. So the aim of my talk is to first, underline and recurring traits and differences in the development of mental disorder-based storylines, and to stress how this teen youth angle gives a specific twist on these medical stories, these clinical stories that seem specific, this combination of the Italian context. So, as argued by Marta, Rocchi and Guglielmo Pescatore, as a genre, medical drama is marked by formal and content characteristics as well. For example, the environment of the hospital that works as a microcosm, or the ensemble cast. And as for the contents, we can categorize three defined plots, like medical cases and professional relationships, and sentimental storylines. In all, let's say, these are mainly featured in medical dramas, although the structure leaves room, of course, for variations in terms of character development, relation to reality, connections to the social environment. So again, like all the other genre, I would say, of the narrative and serial genre, the multiplication of serial products and the subsequent diversification of them produced some attempts to try to complicate some narrative aspects, to diversify narrative aspects, but also the relationship with reality, the relationship with authenticity in representation. So I think the small group of series I mentioned all fit into this trend. So, and the research in both the field of communication studies and psychiatry happened to have discussed the representation of mental disorders in fiction, demonstrating the negative influence, the influence of media in the negative perception of mental disorder and mental health professionals in the public opinion. So often, as Pirikis and others argue, it has been a question of stereotypes and simplifications, sometimes for narrative and filmic purposes. So, for example, the recurring strategy to signify the difference of these characters from the others, whether in negative terms, like underlining the aggressiveness, the dangerousness, or in positive terms, like the trope of the exceptional genius, for example. In any case, stereotyped as the other from the regular people and separated from the social order. Contemporary series seem to actively distance themselves from such oversimplified representations to give a more accurate depiction of the experiences of the symptoms, the diagnosis process, and the medical procedures, as well as the relationship between doctors and patients, and also the depiction of therapy. Medical treatments, for instance, are much more present, discussed, and problematized, and all the three series involve the use of psychotropic drugs and the dangers of suddenly quitting medical treatment. So this aspiration for authenticity has a concrete implication in the series I'm discussing here, the Italian series I'm discussing. So that is the use of consultants, of experts. Stefano Vicari, head of child neuropsychiatry, says at Bambin Gesù in Rome, served as a consultant in Oltre la Soglia. Psychiatrist Paola De Rose for mental, that is instead precisely set at Bambin Gesù Hospital. And Tutto Chiede Salvezza's writers were advised by Peppe Dell'Acqua, who famously helped Franco Basaglia drafting Law 180. So why teenage characters, though? Oltre la Soglia screenwriter Laura Ippoliti provides a starting argument in this interview for Link Idee per la TV. She and Fabio Guarnaccia, the interviewer, talk about adolescence as a liminal moment where girls and boys are in time to prevent the disease from becoming chronic. So Ippoliti mentions the so-called protection factors or risk factors and the fact that the latent mental illness may never be triggered if, and I quote, we live in a healthy environment rich in functioning social networks. So here we see that, at least in the intentions of the writer, the connection between symptoms, disorders, and social context is quite clear. And as Catherine Driscoll and other girlhood scholars and teen dramas and teen cinema scholars point out, the teen genre is filled with, of course, recurring tropes like high school parents, popular music, peer groups, sexual and romantic relationships and interests. And when the teen genre hybridizes with others, we can observe that some of these elements, of course, are dropped, but others are rearticulated and repurposed. And the series in question, for example, include romance and sexuality, and the high school environment is often addressed, although indirectly, as a tangle of social anxieties that trigger the mental distress of the characters, like in Mental, where a character, Nico, her crisis is intertwined with the trauma of a sexual assault in the environment of a party with her schoolmates, or Silvia in Oltre la Soglia, whose crisis of rage turns out to be the consequence of constant bullying. The pressures of the family are also explored in various cases and featured both in Oltre la Soglia and Mental, but also are in the background of Tutto chiede salvezza. So Driscoll also stresses the trope of crucial events as rites of passage in teen life. And on the one hand, she states that she describes passage as a sort of codified institutional door from a state to another. And on the other, passage as dealing with limits, boundaries, and their crossing. So here in this shows the ritual passage between social states correspond to the passage from a state of uncertainty and danger that leads to confinement because, for example, there's no diagnosis yet, or because of the actual harm and pain the characters may suffer, to a state of acceptance of both one's unique mental condition and their multi-layered identity, the character's multi-layered identity, with, of course, the essential help of psychiatrists and professionals. So, on the other hand, the experience of limits seems to adequately describe how one of the core themes of this series is the effort to stretch the boundaries between these young characters and an outside world that has a different conception of what is acceptable, functional, and what is not. So, for example, the recurring focus on the teaching learning part between the psychiatrist and the patient, and the young patients who has to learn some strategies to function in a social system that is outside, and it is clearly not built to accommodate citizens with mental disorders. So another, of course, crucial aspect that can explain the focus on youth in this kind of products is the alarming deterioration of young people's mental health in recent years, exacerbated by the pandemic, but already signaled as worrying also even before the pandemic. So going forward with the series, so Oltre la Soglia revolves around a child psychiatry ER, an emergency room, supervised by Dr. Tosca Navarro, Gabriella Pession. She is the lead character, and she also has schizophrenia, represented a bit didactically by the psychotic projection of her 15-year-old self, who is, again, so a teenager, but also the teen patients are equal protagonists. So depending on the length of their the hospitalization of these young patients, some of them recur in many episodes, while other stay just for one. And among the three series, this is the one that the most incorporate formal and narrative structures from the medical drama. First, each episode begins with a teaser introducing the medical case. Then screen time is dedicated to the investigation of the symptoms and the formulation of diagnosis, with brainstorming from the protagonists, and the presence of the iconic board where doctors are writing the symptoms. And also there are a few romances and sentimental plots among the doctors, but also, of course, the patients. So indeed, the character of Dr. House has been influential in the writing of the protagonist Tosca, as writer Laura Ippoliti confirms again in the same interview. And this is interesting, in my opinion, because first, Tosca is a woman who embodies some characteristics, some features usually attributed to men. She's very tough, she's very harsh and direct, but contrary to House, and maybe again because of this gender difference, Tosca is harsh and direct, but she's also absolutely capable of immediate sympathy towards her young, damaged patients. Ippoliti also mentions Carrie Mathison from Homeland as another source of inspiration for Tosca, and Carrie in Homeland has bipolar disorder and works as a secret agent. So like in Homeland and Oltre la Soglia, they both require a suspension of disbelief towards the implausible circumstances that the two leads characters are able to practice hiding their mental disorder. In Oltre la Soglia, this detail is used to reinforce a special connection with the patients. So the series suggests that sharing an experience of life and social relationship with them, she's able to better understand them. So mental is more teen than medical drama, and mental is indeed like Scam, an adaptation of in this case Finnish format, and is maybe less ambitious in narrative terms compared to the other two series. It's set in one place, which is a psychiatry facility in Bambin Gesù, where the 4 young protagonists are hospitalized, each one experiencing different disorders, hallucination, panic attacks, anorexia, and so on. So, and with the exception of a couple of doctors, one of which is slightly more multifaceted, also her personal trauma is not particularly explored, mental is completely centered on the 4 teenage characters. And this is reflected in the formal style of the series, structured in close-ups and very mobile camera visual effects to enhance the idea of obsessive thoughts and psychotic behaviors. So the result is a fast-paced and designed for streaming and binge-watching series, consciously less realistic in plot turns, like the complete lack of responsibility in adults and the constant plotting and the many escapes from the hospital, while Oltre la Soglia, for instance, is very clear in depicting a strict control system at the hospital. So in this case, mental also focuses, let's say, on emotional emotions and emotional reactions, but also provides a more linear cause-effect connection from trauma to psychotic episodes rather than underlining more systemic problems. Third case, Tutto chiede salvezza, stands out with some distinguishing traits compared to the other two. As I was saying, the protagonist is Daniele, a 20-something, and the series is set in the 90s, and it is the adaptation of Daniele Mencarelli's autobiographical novel. Daniele Mencarelli, who also is involved in the writing of the series. And also the series starts with Daniele hospitalized with a trattamento sanitario obbligatorio, TSO. So after a violent outburst of rage towards his parents. So Tutto chiede salvezza departs from medical drama elements, both in contents and form, although it involves also doctors as secondary but relevant characters. This series has a definite structure of 1 episode for each of the 7 days of Daniele's compulsory conviction, and a focus on the emotional bonding and Daniele's journey, with the little screen time dedicated to other medical diagnoses and less time to clinical angle on Daniele's journey. And then the story world, of course, develops almost entirely in the mind and in the room where Daniele is confined with 5 other patients. And the core here is indeed Daniele's relationship with the other patients and roommate, and subsequently, of course, with himself. A relationship that begins as a furious distancing because of Daniele's traumatic awakening that triggers a violent denial at the beginning of the series, as he keeps repeating, "I am not like them." But then he proceeds to bond more and more with his roommates, and the story delves into everyone's vulnerability and personal trauma. So of these 3 series, Tutto chiede salvezza is the one that I think fits the most in the quality drama category. Because of a structure that develops mostly horizontally, a crude depiction of the less visible, more shocking aspects of the experience of TSO, and it also tries to give insight into the structural problems of psychiatric wards, the lack of resources, the danger of such a controversial measure as the TSO. So the mental health medical drama teen youth formula, to conclude, provide a frame for stories that encompass emotional and educational purposes, for like the mission to substitute the stereotypical and damaging representation of mental disorder with a sympathetic, accurate one that, if not always qualifiable as realistic, certainly is at least believable. And so the aim, the topic, and the focus is more on emotional and educational purposes than the long-term involvement of purer forms of medical dramas. But does this formula work? To just conclude, I'd like to briefly address how audiences responded to this series. Oltre la Soglia had a complicated release process on Canale 5, with changes in programming slots and days caused by its declining ratings. It even ended up airing the last episode in the late night slot, so not even the primetime slot, a choice that further doomed the visibility of the series. And here lead actor Gabriella Pession publicly commented with bitterness the shift in programming, underlining the disappointing change of schedule and again supporting the series' brave efforts. As for Ripley, Mental and Netflix Tutto chiede salvezza, it's difficult to have access to actual numbers, but we can derive some observation from indirect sources, let's say. So Instagram, for instance, on Instagram, neither of them has a dedicated profile, contrary to Oltre la Soglia, but they are referenced in Ripley and Netflix profiles, respectively. But Ripley Gallery to launch the series had very few likes, for example, and the attached social media campaign around the hashtags da vicino nessuno è normale, or è ok non essere ok, or fuori di me, didn't seem to have taken roots. In fact, we find da vicino nessuno è normale as an hashtag to describe also Tutto chiede salvezza's content, which I find that is interesting because, of course, the quote comes from Franco Basaglia, so it is recurringly attached to this kind of serial products. From my own, certainly small and not exhaustive experience with focus groups in high schools, also focus groups about teen dramas, consumption in teenagers, it appears that mental has been mostly ignored by teenagers, and who often don't even consider Ripley in their viewing habits. And Tutto chiede salvezza, on the other hand, appears to be more successful and able to insert in a way in the public discourse around mental health and its depiction, as demonstrated by a more consistent press coverage, and finally, the recent surprise announcement of a second season for a series that was originally conceived as a mini-series. So, the real conclusion, so I just want to say that the unsatisfactory results of Ryan Mediaset series can possibly be attributed to poor distribution and promotional decisions that failed to they show a lack of confidence in differences, in the differentiation of narratives compared, in the case of Oltre la Soglia, to the more traditional programming of Mediaset. And in the case of Mental, maybe a lack of commitment to exploiting the product's strengths and like its formal and distribution specificities and its placement on Ripley, while of course Tutto chiede salvezza probably benefits from the Netflix showcase and the presence of Scam star Federico Cesari. But I'm gonna close here and thank you. Sorry if I went.
Thank you very much, Chiara. I think we and maybe discuss it later because the next paper is very much on similar topics. So I'm going to introduce immediately Nicola Crippa and Mattia Galli. Nicola is a PhD student at Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore of Milan. He has a master's degree with honors in business, media, and organizational communication at Università Cattolica. His dissertation focused on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in serial television narrative. So far, he has collaborated with CERTA, Research Center for Television and Audiovisual Media, within the project Atlas of Dystopian Media Narratives, and published a contribution with Massimo Scaglioni. Mattia Galli is also a PhD student at Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore of Milan, and media analyst at CERTA, the center that I already mentioned. He has also a master's degree with honors in media management at Università Cattolica in Milan. His dissertation focused on the evolution of the scripted format within the contemporary TV system. He has collaborated on several research projects on television production, distribution, and broadcasting in Italy, as well as being one of the members of the Italian unit of the Global Media and Internet Concentration Project. They've both done a lot of things, even if they are so young. The title of the presentation is A Lost Generation, the depiction of youth and its illnesses in the Italian medical drama and beyond, a case study of 4 contemporary series from broadcast TV and OTT platforms. Please.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thanks to the organizer for this wonderful conference. And it is a really great pleasure for me being here with you today and closing this panel by presenting the work carried out together with my fellow colleague, Nicola Crippa. The presentation will focus on how the Italian television scripted production has developed a peculiar view of younger generations and their illnesses in medical-related series. Starting from a diachronic perspective, we will first provide a brief outlook of medical scripted production in the history of broadcasting in Italy, its peculiar traits, and an insight over the last 3 years, a time frame that carries a new and potentially innovative titles. Drawing from a corpus of 4 recent medical-related series, we will show then the results of a content analysis aimed at defining frames to describe the role of medicine and how the younger generations are represented, thus providing what we believe may be a new and interesting research approach to medical dramas. Medical drama has often been considered one of the cornerstones of television scripted production, especially in the US television. In Italy, however, core medical dramas are quite unusual in linear broadcaster schedules. Hospitals and storylines, however, are spread across a wide array of different scripted genres, from thriller and crime to family or teen drama. In particular, we noticed how the number of titles dealing with medical themes in their storylines has noticeably increased after the end of the 90s, making their way through linear channels programming and, more recently, the catalogs of international over-the-top players such as Netflix. By analyzing the whole medical production in the history of broadcasting in Italy, a feature that stands out is the increase of titles dealing directly with family and youth issues, which can be considered as a recurring trend over the last 20 years. Focusing now over the most recent productions of linear television and over-the-top video services, the last 3 years seem, on one hand, to confirm the trends previously illustrated, and on the other, we can notice some relevant developments for the genre. We could notice, for example, how medical series still represent a minority in Italian TV scripted production, both in terms of seasons produced, just 8 out of 148, and hours broadcast. The marginality of the genre in the Italian audiovisual system is somewhat confirmed by the cost per minute of medical productions, which is well below the average of Italian television dramas. These data, which are the results of a research carried out by our research center based on an elaboration of the data made available by the Ministry of Culture, seem to confirm the idea of medical drama as a genre that still stands at the periphery of Italian television. But things have started moving in a new direction in the very last few years. If the ongoing success achieved by Doc in Your Hands is probably the most relevant enjoyed by a medical drama in Italy to date, new titles have found their way in linear broadcaster schedules, such as Fino all'ultimo battito, where the medical setting and storylines are embedded in a plot built around the narrative tools of thrillers, or the family drama Lea, Un Nuovo Giorno. Over-the-top video services, as part of the new slate of local original productions, have turned to medical settings, often intertwined with tropes derived from teen drama and focusing on psychiatric disorders suffered by the younger generations, as in Mental or Everything Calls for Salvation. Having established some key lines for the development of the medical TV genre in the Italian scripted production and its features, it came almost naturally to us to formulate the two questions that guided our research. Since one of the recurring trends in Italian medical-related TV series is the on-screen presence of children and teenagers as patients, we try to establish how medical-themed TV series depict younger generations and what frames are used to describe them. Closely related to this is the second question we have tried to answer in this presentation. That is to say, what is the role of medicine in this series, and what are the on-screen pathologies children, teens, and young adults suffer from most frequently? We have drawn our results from a corpus of 4 series selected among those produced over the last 3 years. 2, Fino all'ultimo battito and Lea, Un Nuovo Giorno, were broadcast by linear flagship TV channel Rai Uno, while the others were distributed by over-the-top video services. Mental was distributed by BVOD platform Replay, and Everything Calls for Salvation was distributed globally by Netflix in 2022. The corpus is made by a total of 36 episodes, and we have counted a total of 33 patients. And to properly estimate the relevance of on-screen representations, we weight characters according to their relevance on screen. That is to say, the number of episodes they actually appear in as patients and are therefore involved in medical-related storylines. Some interesting findings can be drawn even at this very preliminary stage, since the most represented age group is the 0-25 one, thus confirming the thesis according to which children and teens are the age groups most prone to be represented in Italian medical dramas. Drawing on the existing scholarship on diagnostic categorization in TV shows, we found how psychiatric diseases are the most represented on screen, followed by cardiovascular illnesses. Although these results are, of course, partially due to the nature itself of the series part of the corpus, we feel that some key findings can be underlined at this stage. The 0-25 age group is the most represented, with an estimated age of 15. Only the younger age groups, and above all, young adults, suffer from psychiatric disorders, which have become a way to describe, from a narrative perspective at least, the unease of younger generations towards their present and future. And lastly, it is interesting to notice how only children aged between 0 and 13 suffer from oncological diseases. These pathologies are often linked to the fear for the loss of a new generation, to which a theme to which we shall come back later on in the presentation. A breakdown series by series can help pointing out the features of each title and clarifying some ideas that may otherwise sound quite obscure. Lea, Un Nuovo Giorno is set in a pediatric ward. Characters are mostly children, and the only 2 recurring patients are a child and a teen suffering, respectively, from sarcoma and chronic kidney failure. Fino all'ultimo battito mixes the hospital setting and a doctor as a head character with a plot infused with narrative elements coming from the thriller genre. The pathologies represented then are unbalanced towards cardiovascular diseases, but although those have a relevant on-screen presence, recurring patients are once again children and teens. Everything Calls for Salvation is set in a psychiatric ward where the characters are under compulsory treatment. While for 2 of them it is clearly stated how they suffer from psychiatric disorders, for the others, illnesses are just vaguely described. Patients are mostly young adults, while the adult age group is represented by just 1 character, Mario, who appears in 7 out of 8 episodes and acts as a sort of father figure for the group. In Mental, on the other hand, patients are exclusively teens suffering from a wide array of psychiatric disorders quoted by the DSM, from BPD to anorexia, going through bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. To sum up, we have briefly shown an insight of which pathologies are shown on screen and which age groups appear more frequently in our corpus. It is now time to explain how younger generations are represented, and I therefore leave the floor to my fellow colleague, Nicola Crippa.
Thank you, Mattia. And of course, thanks to the organizers and the participants. I am very honored to speak this evening. So following this preliminary analysis, we isolated our 21 youngest patients ranging from 0 to 25 years old to try answering our first research question. We did this using two sets of categories. The first one, which you see in dark blue on the left, was created by researchers, and Word, to map the representation of health and illnesses on screen, while the second one on the right in light blue was created by us after watching the 4 TV series and analyzing their portrayal of youth. The first approach was drawn from existing literature on entertainment education studies. Authors suggested the existence of at least 5 different frames whose purpose is to represent health and illnesses on screen, regardless of the patient's age. It's important to note that, according to theory, each frame associates health and illnesses with certain kinds of problems and particular sorts of solutions, while obviously hiding others. On the left side of the chart, we summarize the 5 health media frames into 2 groups. The first is the medical frame, 1.1, in which patient sufferings are caused by inner biological determinants, while the second is the non-medical one, comprising social structural, lifestyle, environmental, and therapeutic frames, in which the disease is viewed to be mainly caused by external and non-biological triggers, for instance, bad lifestyle choices, poverty or criminality problems, mistreatment by healthcare providers. In our sample, around 71% of health frame occurrences are associated with the medical one. The second approach that you see summarized on the right was instead bottom-up, based on watching the 4 TV series and observing the young patients. Within these shows, we identified and proposed 4 other media frames related specifically to the depiction of youth and its relationships with older generations. Indeed, one of the common traits of these stories is that the young patients find themselves lost, and parents play a big role in this, either positive or detrimental. In the abandonment frame 2.1, hospital stays caused or aggravated by parental physical abandonment. Instead, in what we have called generational conflict 2.2, patients have troubling relationship with parents. These first 2 frames, 2.1 and 2.2, are part of a bigger group of young patients who are lost because of parental actions. On the other hand, in the so-called lostness frame, which is 2.3, the hospital stay is caused or aggravated by the individual's own actions or attitudes, for instance, antisocial behaviors or drug consumption, for which family is not directly responsible. This is what in Italian can be translated by smarrimento, meaning going astray from the right path. Finally, the last one is what we have called the care frame, in which we see fragile patients who absolutely need family or caregivers protecting them. The latter 2 frames are indeed the ones in which patients would be lost without parent support. Now, let's dive into the distributions of those frames in the 4 TV series. If we start by matching these 4 categories that comprise all these 9 frames, we can build a positioning map serving as a compass for our interpretations. On the y-axis, we find here frames related with health. On top, the frames where patient sufferings are caused by external determinants. And on the bottom, we have TV series whose young patients fall mostly in the medical or biological frame. On the other hand, in the x-axis, we find the youth frames. On the left, patients who would be lost without parents' help, so lostness and care frames. And on the right, the ones lost because of parents' negative involvement in their lives, so the abandonment and generational conflict frames. It's worth noting that we have associated every patient to only one frame, considered by both of us to be the dominant in his or her story arc. And the score that you see near the lines is calculated considering the number of episodes in which every young patient and its respective frame appear, so recurring characters weigh more than episodic ones. As you can see, on average, the 2 broadcast TV series tend to stay on the bottom left corner, bringing a more positive representation of older generations, while OTT series are more on the right of the spectrum. That is because, being teen dramas or coming-of-age stories, they view parents in a more negative or disillusioned manner. Delving deeper into the frame representations of younger patients, these are the main findings for each TV content. In Lea un nuovo giorno, the female protagonist has lost her son and is faced with the case of a child sick with cancer abandoned by his adoptive parents, so there's the abandonment frame. To prevent him from being repatriated to Russia, she initially plans to adopt him herself. In other patient stories, besides medicine, family support, so the care frame, is usually crucial in the healing process. In the other Rai Uno show, the thriller Fino all'ultimo battito, the protagonist's son is ill and must be saved at any cost, so there's the care frame here too, even if it means coming to terms with the mafia. Anyway, in these first two shows, the main theme is the fear of losing children. Moving to the OTT series, the fifth episode of Netflix's Everything Calls for Salvation offers us an exemplary perspective on the series' strong imbalance towards the non-biological health frames. The main character, who absolutely falls into the lostness frame, says, and I quote, "The illnesses of all those who are in here," and he's talking about a psychiatric department, "they seem to me like one single illness, but it's not our illness, it's the world's." So it's not a case that only few diagnoses are here mentioned, because the focus is more on the society not accepting diversity. On the contrary, in mental, diagnoses are always communicated, and the importance of medication in treating mental illnesses is frequently mentioned, so there's the medical frame. Parents are often portrayed as absent or distant, or as negative characters who have abandoned their children. Moving to the conclusions, we group the frame occurrences of the 4 TV series by type of television offerings. On the left, the broadcast ones, and on the right, the OTT ones, to show how the focus on youth and their treatment is declined rather differently, if not oppositely, depending on the editorial destination, at least in these 4 cases. Summing up the key findings in these 2 radar charts, we noticed how broadcast series, while being more oriented to the medical frame, sometimes introduce minor storylines in which other variables intervene in the care process, while OTT series, dealing with more limited stories, tend to be totally unbalanced either toward the medical frame, in the case of mental, or non-medical ones, in the case of Everything Calls for Salvation. More interesting are the youth-related frames. In the free-to-air offering, caring is by far the most widespread frame, and even in the abandonment frame, the heroic and positive role of older generations, family, doctors, and caregivers remains relevant. In the OTT offering, on the other hand, lostness is the most prevalent youth frame, followed by abandonment and generational conflict. The role of the older generation is generally more negative. Parents are portrayed as distant, and even doctors are more cynical or unable to cope with the workload. Considering these results, we can therefore say that in the 2 Rai Uno series, doctors heal patients together or thanks to families, while in the 2 OTT series, hospitals replace family care, creating new communities in contrast to the older generation's values. So the healing process is here achieved with the formation of a new family. These evaluations appear to be quite in line with the goals and audiences pursued by the 2 offerings. The 2 free-to-air series, given their older audiences, are more oriented toward exploring parental fears, while the 2 OTT series are more focused on teens' independence aspirations. In any case, central to Italian medical dramas remains the attention paid to a younger generation deemed sick, lost, and more or less hopelessly defeated, a symptom perhaps of a country that is only recently trying to process one of its most traumatic illness, the lack of a generational turnover. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both Nicola and Mattia. We have, I think, almost 15 minutes because you've been very much on time. Maybe we can open the debate now, and both from people online and people here. If you have questions, comments. First, you could comment on their analysis, and vice versa. It would be. This is my first question. Yeah, and I just break the ice as I'll just say the other one to Marie. I was thinking of the redemptive dimension that you underlined, which is also kind of anti-hero dimension, maybe not heroic, but anti-heroic, but that eventually restore a certain kind of role somehow. So if you could comment a little bit on that, and also on the axis of race, because on the axis of race, since you're dealing with US TV series, I mean, they're almost all white men, the ones that you analyzed, or are there any differences?
So I'll start, and then you fight together. Thanks for these questions. About the redemptive dimension, I think it goes on with what I said about accepting their flaws, and like a true hero is someone that can also, that's not perfect from the start, and that can acknowledge that they've failed and try to be better than they were. So I think it has something to do with that. But it's almost because these heroes, they're paradoxical. But I think true heroes are paradoxical. When you see superheroes, I mean, they're full of paradoxes. Some of them are drunk or etc. If you think about Marvel heroes, for instance. But and here we have fathers that are pushing masculinity in new territories, while at the same time being super muscular and handsome and almost. And I was thinking about The Resident, which I didn't talk about, but some of you did. In The Resident, we also have a single father who's a widow. And so he also has these nurturing characteristics, while at the same time being coming from the military and being kind of that alpha male character. So that's how they move. I think from these producers, there's a will to push into new territories of fatherhood, while at the same time keeping the viewers in line with what can be expected of traditional masculinity, because we don't want to stray too far. And about race, since it's the US, some of these fathers that I've mentioned, almost half of them are Black. Yeah, they're including in ER, which was quite, I mean, nowadays, both the producers of New Amsterdam and of course Shonda Rhimes for Grey's Anatomy, they're very aware of how necessary it is to have a diverse cast, but also back in ER, in something that there was Peter Benton, for instance, is heavily discriminated against in the show for being a Black character, but at the same time, he displays this nurturing fatherhood, not nurturing, but involved fatherhood.
No, actually, I had a question for my colleague here. I mean, I had an observation, and thank you, because it was very interesting, and I think that something was quite connected, but also from a very different angle. And I don't know if you agree, but it was also interesting to see how we can rearticulate like TV scenario among different distinct separated categories compared to before. For example, you rightly mentioned opposed, let's say, the OTT to traditional TV, while in my case it was, of course, it's true that Rai Play was OTT, but I framed maybe a little bit more like an emanation of Rai, so underlining some more, I don't know, a bit of a lack of understanding of how the new scenario work, for example, in my opinion, in the failing of to adequately promote mental. So there is something that I'd say about Rai also sometimes, and but so it's not a real question, but I wanted to know if you agree with the fact that it's interesting how we can differently talk about very similar issues from maybe complementary angles. And no, the two Rai series that you mentioned, the other question is, I don't know them. So I was wondering, because I don't know if I understand correctly, they also featured the young characters, you said, okay. So yeah, okay, so that makes perfectly sense what you were concluding about. So thank you.
Thank you for your observation. Yes, in our investigation, we didn't focus on the consumption and the reception aspects of the series. So, as you said, you can see the investigation through different angles. We tried to stay focused on the production aspects and the editorial offering, and indeed, we can find some similarities between the platform offering and in contrast to the broadcast ones, especially when it comes to the main themes in the Rai Uno series, which are not which are not teen dramas. To answer your second question, the main theme is more on the children feared loss, so it explores more the parental fears, while the OTT series, as I said, maybe because they're targeted to younger audiences, even if maybe the goals they had partially failed, at least in the case of mental, as you said. So focusing especially on the narrative aspects, I think that the variable of the offering is important to highlight.
And if I may add, closely related to the redemptive dimension we mentioned before, in Fino all'ultimo battito in Lea, the healing process of the children in this case is closely related to the healing process of the doctors, who are the head characters of the two titles. They have some ghosts in their past they want to get passed by, and this can only be done if they can heal their patients, their young patients.
Thank you very much. Are there other questions or comments? Maybe from home? There are nothing in chat. No questions.
Hi, I'm Emiliano. Thanks so much for your presentations. Mine was a curiosity, maybe a point that seems interesting to me that we may a little bit expand. I'm referring to Chiara and Nicola and Mattia, wonderful talks. That is, very properly, you mentioned a kind of generational clash between, Gen Z or new generations and the generation of adult. I was wondering, speaking of psychologists and psychiatrics, what's the general image that sticks out from the series constituting your cases, your case focus? Because I think the image of these adult medical or semi-medical figures is not always positive, as also you hinted. I'm also, for example, thinking about the last season, Chiara, you mentioned Date of Scam, where the school psychologist there somehow harassing, we don't know so much about that subplot, but, some of the pupils of the school. So that's a quite controversial and problematic profile, also regarding the way and the ways they treat this kind of disorders, because sometimes I suspect there's also a kind of, critique towards an exaggerate medicalization of psychologist disorders and so on. Do you have any extra ideas on these, drawing on the cases you mentioned? That's just a curiosity. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you for the question. And so let's say that in the cases I analyzed, I think that a overall negative representation is of health professional and therapists and psychiatrists is almost absent, or I won't define it negative, but I think there is an effort that is maybe still problematic to humanize them as imperfect, also sometimes literally damaged people, like in the case of Tosca Navarro, who again, and the writers are quite clear, I mean, it is a sort of imaginary scenario where she, with her disorder, can work. So I don't know, I think it is a bit problematic because it still remains in the realm of we are not able to give a realistic, not in some ways over dramatic representation of professionals. But on the other hand, we are talking about entertainment products. So we know that there are many concessions to that. And as for medicine, for example, I think, again, we are going forward because at least 2 of the 3 series, they are quite clear in the importance of, I mean, in Oltre la Soglia, which I think it's particularly striking, even because of the 3 is the only one that is was actually on prime time on Canale 5. When young patients stop to take in their medicines, a catastrophe happens. So things, I think, in that department are still changes. And I just wanted to mention, because you mentioned the scam, the last season of scam, it's true, and we don't know what will happen, we can imagine. But again, in that case, again, I think that they are trying, maybe not perfectly, but to focus more, I think, to try more to problematize the idealistic idea that the boys and girls have of an ideal figure of educator more than I mean, in that case, a therapist and not a psychiatry. But it's true that he still is, the counselor of the school. So you chose to trigger that storyline with that particular character. But also, I think we can define him as, yes, the counselor, but also as the male educator idealized by the young characters. I don't know if I answered. Okay, thank you.
What I can add is that in our analysis, the psychology and psychiatric representation is pretty ambiguous, depending on the 2 series, especially because in mental, at least the goal is to, give a positive model of a psychiatric department, how things should work, even if to be obviously a story, there has to be some clashes, some conflicts, even between, doctors and patients. While in the Everything Calls for Salvation, there is more a critique on the system. So it's not, it's more a negative representation, I'd say. Indeed, we recorded the series as more unbalanced toward the social structural frame, partly because of this, because the diagnoses are not always mentioned. Only 2 characters are labeled as diagnosed to mood disorders, while the others have unspecified medical conditions, and they seem to be there only because of personal problems or problems of healthcare facilities or providers. So also the way in which the characters, navigate through the hospitals, give up a very negative representation of the healthcare facility in general.
Okay, it's 6:30. We are really Swiss. Anyway, I want to thank again all the 4 speakers for their really interesting and fantastic presentations, and all of you for being here. And tomorrow morning, 9:30 for the keynote speech. Thank you and have a good evening. Bye.